Okay, I think we'll make a start. We're going to go live now. So, good afternoon, members, officers, and any members of the public in the public gallery or viewing on the live stream. Welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Scrutiny and Overview Committee. My name is Councillor Graham Cone, and I am chairing this meeting. My vice chair is sitting to my right, and I will introduce other attendees when I invite them to speak. Committee members, may I remind you that you should have before you the main agenda. Those in the chamber are reminded that the meeting is being live streamed. By your presence here in the chamber and via video conference, you are deemed to have consented to being filmed and to the use of images and sound recordings for webcast and archive recording. The normal procedure at Scrutiny and Overview Committee meetings is to review and make recommendations to Cabinet by affirmation. Only those members of the committee present in the chamber will be able to move and second motions or affirm. However, members present virtually may speak in the debate. May I ask those members who are joining us remotely to ensure their cameras and microphones remain off unless they are addressing the committee. For those of us present in the room, please ensure your microphone is close to you and speak clearly when addressing the room. Finally, a report of this meeting will be presented to Cabinet on the 24th of March. I won't be able to attend that meeting. I don't know if any other members will. Councillor Bradnam, thank you for that. So if we go on to apologies, have we had any apologies for absence?
Chair, we haven't received any apologies for absence at this point.
Thank you for that. So we'll move on to declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest they want to make clear before the meeting starts? No? Good. If anything becomes apparent during the meeting, feel free to raise it at that time. So we will move on to agenda item 4, which is Cambridge Growth Company, pages 5 to 24. I propose that the Growth Company are going to do a short presentation for us prior to us taking questions, and then we will have after the presentation a list of headings as to where those questions should sort of sit. I am happy if people deviate a little bit from that, but if we can try and keep within those headings just to make it a bit easier for managing the meeting and the people taking the questions. So I think we'll hand over to Peter Freeman and the Cambridge Growth Company to present their presentation and then take it from there. Thank you. Yeah.
So it's red. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty loud. Thank you very much for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here and explain what we've been up to in the 2.5 years since Beth and I first came up. And the last few weeks and the next few weeks are periods of probably relatively rapid transition. I think the first thing I'd say is you are all campaigners, you're all believers in what you do for your locality and your party. And although Beth and I and our team are not politicians, we absolutely believe in Cambridge and want to do the right thing for Cambridge. And I think it's just incredibly exciting. And when we first came up at the request of Michael Gove, who was then Secretary of State, we came up not knowing what we would discover, other than we knew it was a wonderful and ancient university in a beautiful town centre. And I think from the very beginning, we discovered the incredible sort of depth of commitment of the local councillors, the join up overall across political parties, despite obvious occasional spats, and the determination to make Cambridge the best and greatest place it can be. And from a personal viewpoint, at that time I was chair of Homes England. I was visiting probably 100 different towns in England of different sizes, different environments and opportunities. And I think what I felt at the very beginning is Cambridge was absolutely incredible in terms of the opportunities. It was also quite up on the line of challenges, but if you were kind of setting opportunities against challenges, the opportunities were far greater. And the opportunities, I think, are part about what I was saying about local politics, the fact that the city and South Cambridgeshire have come together, that Labour and Liberal have come together, that we have a Conservative mayor who I think on the whole is supporting growth in Cambridge. Partly the history of the university and innovation and unicorns and Nobel Prizes. And at the same time, there are clear challenges on transport and water, which are, in effect, major infrastructure challenges that probably need bigger budgets than normally pass through local authorities and need conviction to Treasury that the amount of development and growth that may happen, the benefits of the economy will justify finding the sums to help those. And the challenge that I hadn't expected was, in a sense, that there are considerable wards, definitely in the city and in some of the villages, which are significantly disadvantaged. And so any growth that we propose must be for the benefit of the communities as a whole. It's not just about international postdocs, it's not just about life sciences or AI, it is about a sustainable city. And I say that not just as a piece of what feels emotionally right or socially right, but it's commercially right. If the city doesn't work for everybody, in the end, it won't be able to attract the talent. So if the government wants economic growth here, we've also got to have social justice, we've got to sort transport, we've got to sort water. And we've got to build really fantastic places. I spent sort of probably the last 25 years of my life for Homes England trying to do regeneration in the right way, mixed use, holistic. The three major schemes I've been associated with, we built the public square before we built a single building. And I think infrastructure-led is often a sort of catchphrase that isn't, it's a marketing phrase. With us, we mean infrastructure-led. That's how you get the best speed of delivery, it's how you get the best returns that pay back the infrastructure, it's how you attract people to a place. So there's a kind of a virtuous circle or a vicious cycle. The virtuous circle is infrastructure-led, people like it, there's less local opposition, more people move in, the economy grows, it pays back the infrastructure. Led by just development, that's single-use housing or single-use life sciences, the people don't like it, it's taken up slowly, it doesn't pay it back, and so on. So I think we understand how to drive good growth for the whole community. What's the next slide? This was a letter written to the four locally elected leaders in August 24, shortly after Labour came into office. And it was the start of confirmation that the Labour Party would like to run with Cambridge. A month or two later, after Pennycook and Balance had both come up here for the day with me, they reconfirmed that they would like me to keep on with this. And in the letter itself, it makes it clear that this is not meant to be heavy boots from Westminster. This is meant to be collaborative. We are meant to be liaising, consulting, helping and listening to you, and you are the experts. This is the third day this week that I'm up here. I think I'm probably here at least 2 days a week, probably for most of the last 7 or 8 months since I stopped being chair of Homes England. Beth is here a couple of days a week. When we first started coming up here, the only people you could collaborate with were sort of Beth and me. and the team has now grown to 30. Most of them live relatively locally, and there is a Cambridge office set up in Eastbrook. We would like to get our own front door sooner or later. There will be 50 people by next summer, by this summer in Cambridge, and we are about to go out and start recruiting for chief executive to be based here. I think you all have picked up last October the government announcing both 400 million for Cambridge, which was a nice start, but also that they wish to start consulting on a centrally led DevCo. Nothing is ever cast in iron with government until it's done, but that is likely to be in the very, very imminent future. And if at the end of the consultation and the end of the Secretary of State sort of thinking about the response, they want to have a DevCo, it would probably be up and running by early autumn. So quite a lot's happened on the journey, and a lot is happening at the moment. Beth, I think, is speaking to the next slide. Oh, no, I'm speaking to the next one. Beth is sort of acting CEO, had a long background in Homes England and is fabulous. And Nathan, to my right, will also be speaking to a slide about environment and sustainability. In terms of listening to local councillors, Bridget recommended Nathan and Bridget recommended Karen, and we hired them on the spot. On this slide, I mean, it is an incredible ecosystem of organisations and acronyms to drive forward the level of growth and change in a good way. You've got to carry lots of government departments with you. You've got to carry wildlife trusts with you. You've got to carry training centres with you, and so on. And I think an important thing to say about the growth company or development corporation is it is absolutely not trying to supplant the local authority. It is trying to work with it. And the one area of intense focus, which I think a DevCo adds some benefit on, is focusing on physical delivery of the built environment. We're not here to take over adult care or childcare. We're not here to take over planning applications for 99% of planning applications. We are here for the most strategic interventions on infrastructure and major projects like Marshalls and CBC, which have gone round for years and years and years, and just need the focus of I think, kind of government powers, government money, including CPO, to make sure they happen and happen well. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you. So I just wanted to reflect on some of the early activities of the Growth Company to explain what we've been doing over the past couple of years whilst we've been working locally with you. Sorry, apologies for that. So this is just a slide to reflect on the early activities over the past couple of years. As Peter said, we've been coming up to learn a lot about Cambridge, but we've also been coming up to understand what the barriers are and how we can unlock those barriers from a national government leverage perspective, and coordinating parties to help to do things such as unlock the 9,000 homes that were blocked when we first arrived in Cambridge due to some of the water scarcity issues. And that was one of the first steps that we took to bring together the water scarcity group, and that's actually now developed so that there is actually now a DEFRA task force, which is ministerial level, that has been created to recognise the significance of the challenge and the importance of being able to pull together and convene these parties to unlock the most significant issues. So that's been around water, and there's a huge amount of work that is ongoing, which I think Nathan will pick up on some of that when we talk a little bit later about sustainability and the environment. But we've also focused on, as Peter mentioned, we've been working with partners around the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. So we've been working with the university and funded a business case to look into the clinical model to underpin a new hospital and provide funding for that. We've looked at or helped to unlock, working with the County Council and GCP, the progression of CSET into the Transport and Works Act order. And we've also worked on other sites such as Waterbeach, where there was a a stalled activity because of the relocation of the train station and the funding gap for the relocation. So the benefit of currently being housed within Homes England as well is that we are able to access their funds, as well as Peter mentioned, we've had some funding allocated to access going forward for the 400 million. So we're trying to make best use of all of the contacts and organisations that we work with, and we provided £23 million of grant into Waterbeach, which helped to unlock the 4,500 homes there as well. So that's been really kind of a key focus, and as Peter said, we are a growing team, and we're hoping to do a lot more of that as we grow, and now that we've got some greater certainty on funding, but also still got the option to talk to Homes England and continue to look at solving problems through that route as well. And whilst that has been ongoing, we have been working very closely with GCSP to look at developing an evidence base. And that evidence base is really about, as Peter said, we do mean it in terms of infrastructure first. And we know that we need to have a very good justification and rationale to underpin any asks for funding around infrastructure. And we need to have a long-term infrastructure plan to drive the ambition in the area. So the evidence is being developed, and also as part of that we're looking at trying to really understand the economic potential, so that we've got both the sort of economic potential detail alongside that infrastructure, so that we can then start to think about growth, ensuring that you're both making the city more livable, you're increasing prosperity as part of the growth ambition. I think passing on to Nathan now.
Okay. Yeah. Can you? Is this okay? Is this okay? Can you hear me? Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. So, good evening to you all. It's super to be here. I've been with the Environment and Sustainability Advisor with the Growth Company for just coming up to a year now. Before that, I was the Environment Lead in the Oxcam Pan-Regional Partnership. I was Secretariat to the Environment Working Group, and as luck would have it, Bridget was the chair of that working group. And the Chief Executive was my Senior Responsible Officer. So I'd like to think as though I kind of know where you're coming from as a local authority. Before that, I spent a long time in local authorities, both in terms of an interim space facilitating change and transformation, but also doing biodiversity, air quality, contaminated land, waste services and what have you. So in speaking to you this evening, I completely understand kind of concerns around infrastructure, the environment, the need to address these kind of things in terms of nature recovery and finding solutions to water, because it doesn't only mean a lot to you, it means a lot to the communities. And I think in the 20 odd years that I've been working in local authorities, I think that's kind of running straight through me. Peter and Beth both talked about the importance of infrastructure, and for me that includes environmental infrastructure as well. Green, blue, everything in between, as well as clearly the key constraints that we have in Greater Cambridge around transport and around water. We don't need to go too much into water because it's kind of stating the obvious, but I think certainly we, as well as yourselves, sit on the water scarcity group that's chaired with Paul Leinster. I've known Paul for quite a while now, so we have a really good relationship. And I think what's certainly key in that group is a wide variety of projects, of government activity focused on Cambridge to tackle and do our bit to be able to unlock some of those constraints going forward. Not just on water supply, but also on elements around water quality, wastewater treatment, and restoration of chalk streams as well. Your officers will have a lot of information around what's going on within the water scarcity group, so I won't spend too much time going through that. But I think in between those meetings, we certainly have a regular catch-up with colleagues in MHCLG that feed into the DEFRA task force on water, that make sure that we're able to keep the drumbeat going for water in Cambridge. making sure that there continues to be a degree of oversight and progress on some of the major infrastructure schemes that are happening at the moment, not just the Grafham water transfer, the new Fens reservoir, but also large-scale water transfer schemes. So at the moment, Anglian Water are putting in a big pipe that goes all the way up from Scunthorpe down towards Cambridge to be able to move water in significant quantities into the right areas. And also in October, with the government announcement, they also announced some of the action that they're taking on Anglian Water as well. And certainly in the position that we occupy a space where we're able to work at that face of government, maintaining and visibility for those water issues for Cambridge, as well as providing any support that Anglian Water might need in terms of their future infrastructure plans. For ourselves, we'll be taking on appointed a technical director that will be able to provide focus on water, and we have further plans going forward as well. So certainly resources are being aligned in that way as well. From an environment perspective, I'm going to raise the Oxcam environment principles that we adopted as a region. They're currently hosted by CPCA, but as far as a project that is very close to my heart, I'm certainly taking the opportunity to be able to thread those through into the work of the Cambridge Growth Company, and you'll see in the document that was posted the case, the strategic narrative, the case for Cambridge that's on our website, that the environment principles are referenced in there as well. So those principles around net zero, water, nature recovery, circular economy and climate resilience are certainly there up front and centre to be woven into the work that we're doing going forward. And certainly then also on transport. We don't have transport powers, but we are working closely with the Combined Mayoral Authority on a piece of work to evaluate at a concept level different options for mass rapid transport systems. These are building on the work's already been published by yourselves in terms of the emerging local plan. They're agnostic of transport options, or method of transport rather, but certainly wanting to ensure that people can move around and move through Cambridge sustainably and efficiently as best as possible. And certainly going forward, we'll continue to be working with yourselves and partners to find ways of working to achieve future solutions, and then again at that face of government be able to put options together to the Treasury to be able to bring forward funding, hopefully. So I'll pause there and we can pick up a bit more later. Back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. So we've spoken a bit about what we've been doing to date, and I think it's important also now to look at what the next steps are. And some of this was set out in the document that's referenced on this slide, so hopefully people have been able to have a look at that document, which I think is important as it sets out how special Cambridge is for many reasons. Obviously it's sort of defined as an economic powerhouse, but there is a huge amount of cultural value and other parts of the city that we are particularly keen to ensure that everything that makes Cambridge special continues going forwards. But also the document sets out the challenges that have been identified and we've touched on already in this presentation around transport, around water, and how that is threatening the success of the city across many different ways, not just economically. It's threatening how livable the city feels and the attraction of people to come and live and work here. So the response needs to be significant as well. So we are absolutely impressed by everything we see in Cambridge, and we know that from a design perspective, from a planning perspective, it's an award-winning planning service. The design awards are amazing, and this is just how can we build on that? How can we bring the national leverage and the national powers that can come with the Development Corporation to work with the local and the regional? There's a big role going forwards in terms of the CPCA and spatial development strategies, and how can we try to harness the national, regional and local so that we can drive the ambitions and secure sustainable inclusive growth for Cambridge. And I think that the benefits of bringing in, we've obviously touched on leveraging the sort of convening power of Whitehall. We've touched on the balance sheet and the ability to secure long-term funding. I think the ability of a development corporation to look across a much longer term horizon and to plan for that, and to work, as Nathan was talking about, particularly with, for example, the water companies, around challenging them and planning for long-term growth so that the infrastructure can be identified and we can look at ways that that can be delivered is hugely important. So the right tools to do the jobs, as they're sort of put on the slide, are around having the right objectives and making sure that actually the focus of the development corporation does cover those environmental concerns that Nathan's mentioned, the economic prosperity opportunities, the ability to resolve the infrastructure deficits that are available, and really ensuring that we've got the right focus so that we can start to plan over the long term, secure the funding, justify the funding as well, and not only the funding but things like the mass rapid transit. Obviously you do get to a point where critical mass is required to justify and operate and have these as viable solutions. So it's about trying to make sure that all of this can come together and that the growth plan is there, that is over a long-term period, but is justifying the decisions that we need to make now and securing the funding and the support from national government in particular to enable this to happen. But very much aware of everything that is going on locally and wanting to dock in with that. And we've been very clear that we are in support of the local plan and that is the first phase of any growth plans for this area. We think that the allocations and proposals were fully supportive of what we're seeing in that space. And then this is about how do we build upon that? How do we ensure that whilst that is going through, we can build this infrastructure plan and start to look for a much longer term horizon to enable the growth over that period.
Thanks very much. Does that conclude the presentation? Lovely.
There is one last slide, which I think we've probably covered, but I think it's important to say that Peter did mention there is, as announced in October, there are plans for a consultation on the Development Corporation, and this is just to give a sort of heads up as to what will be covered in that consultation. So I'll leave that there. I think we have covered the items in it, but just
Lovely.
for awareness.
Thanks very much. So what I propose we do, we will bring up the headings that have been discussed, and if councillors can try and ask questions within those headings, we'll just have a short pause whilst we bring them up, and I'll let councillors just have a look over those, and then we'll take questions from the committee. So that we've got 7 headings, and I am a little bit conscious of time, so I understand that some things might take longer than others, but Councillor Drew will nudge me if we need to move on. So I'll just give you a minute to have a look at those so you can have a think about where your questions might fall. I'm not too uncomfortable if questions come under the wrong headings, but if just have a think about that when we're asking questions. So if we take the first one, governance and democratic accountability. Lovely. Councillor Richard Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions, I think, fall into this. So it didn't escape my notice, or probably anybody else's, that you mentioned marshals and CBC. So I just wanted one question, is that your focus currently? Second question is, what's happened to the 150k homes figure that's been bandied around in the past? We've not really heard anything about that. And direct question just on governance. Can you tell us what your proposal is for the geographic boundary of the growth company? Because it's obviously very important for people around here. And just a more general comment on that. You've talked a lot about what makes Cambridge special. You've not actually said anything about what makes South Cambridgeshire special. And South Cambridgeshire is different from Cambridge. And I think that probably if there is growth, a lot of the growth is actually going to be in South Cambridgeshire. So I think maybe loosening the Cambridge focus, because the things that make South Cambridgeshire special are rather different to what make Cambridge special. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Peter Freeman.
The most specific of those with a direct answer is the red line boundary. And we have discussed that at length in the Advisory Council with elected leaders and with officers. We've discussed it at length with the department. And there were probably sort of three choices. A choice where you just put a red line around 2, 3, 4 major sites like Marshall's and said we are just there to intervene in them. But that would have, A, left you no flexibility and no ability to deal with the corridors in which you might put infrastructure. There was a second choice in which you tried to sort of exclude 90% of the whole of South Cambridgeshire, which would then leave the 10% most concerned, and the 10% would be some mixture of the natural transport corridors, places nearest to stations or whatever. And the third choice, which we felt was the right one at this point, was to make the red line consistent with the local authority boundaries of what you have sought to make the unitary authority, so it's the city and South Cambridgeshire. And we think that in a way that is right, not that it's dodging a bullet, but it's too early for us to say where we think we should go in addition to the local plan. We absolutely fully support the local plan. It will take a good long time to get the things that are in the local plan underway. And in the meantime, if we're going through the process of consultation and setting up a special vehicle, we think a big red line with the assurance that actually 90% of it is not in contemplation is the right thing. And one of the things I would say is that because our focus is on kind of major set pieces, there may be others apart from Marshall's or CBC or trying to make artery work again. We think we are in a way protecting villages that don't want growth, because instead of, and your council has already gone in that direction by sort of going for Cambourne, Northstowe, Waterbeach. You have said most growth will be in a few targeted places. And we think that's the right thing. We think what most local authorities do of a kind of sharing the pain in every village is daft planning. So that's the red line. Marshall's and CBC, it would be a tragedy if they don't come forward in the best way. They both need a lot of infrastructure. Wrestling the Marshall's family down has taken generations of people unsuccessfully, but I hope there will be some news on that at some point in the next few months. And CBC similarly has issues with different key landowners having different wishes, and they haven't really been resolved, and nothing can happen without CSET and Southern Access Road, so there are major pieces of infrastructure that need to be funded up front. And as I said earlier, I think that's one of our key roles, not to hand out government grant willy-nilly, but to put together a financial package that sees that infrastructure is done. On the 150,000 homes, that's sort of been knocking around and in a way was a splitting the difference of goes rather excitable 250,000 homes in the local plan at 50. I suspect that sooner or later 150 will be built, whether that's in 25 years or longer, whether it includes things like Tempsford or doesn't. Again, at the moment, we are not naming a number. We are completing an evidence base in the next couple of months, which we're sharing with the local authority. But it's a balance. Are you only preparing for the next 10 or 15 years, or are you preparing for a longer period? Are you convincing the Treasury that transport systems should be very materially upgraded because there will be very material growth? But for the general area, it's probably not a daft figure, but the general area might go into Tempsford or Haverhill. On South Cambridgeshire, as opposed to the city, you're right that much of what I said is about, in a sense, the university and innovation in that. But there were 35 business parks, many of which are in South Cambridgeshire, not the city. The city centre is so focused on the university and tourism, and so heavily listed that much growth will be outside. So, I mean, I'd say to the extent that villages, you don't want villages to grow and they don't want them to grow, we are sort of agnostic to South Cambridgeshire and would be happy for it to stay as it is. To the extent that it needs more infrastructure and we can help, we will. And there will probably be a few places that are near big science parks, business parks, or near existing stations where in due course we probably will recommend kind of comprehensive, holistic intensification. Does that cover your questions?
Councillor Richard Williams.
Very direct answers, thank you. I will let other people ask their question.
Thank you for that. Lovely. Councillor Drew.
Thank you. We will definitely go for a very direct question. If the residents of South Cambridgeshire don't like the leadership of Councillor Smith as the leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council, they have an opportunity every 4 years to vote her out. If they don't like the leadership of Paul Bristow as the mayor, they have an opportunity every 4 years to vote him out. If they don't like the leadership of the county council, they have an opportunity to vote them out. Whilst you may have said that you see your work as partnership with the local authorities, you are going to be an extremely important and influential person in the future of the lives of the residents of South Cambridgeshire. How do they get rid of you if they don't like what you do?
A good job. Well, seriously, I mean, you know, I'm fireable by the Secretary of State at a moment's notice, so you don't even have to wait 4 years. So if you can influence the Secretary of State to say I'm doing a crap job, I'll be gone tomorrow. I'm only here to do a good job, and whether it helps that I don't face election and can face people down without losing votes. On some occasions, it probably does, but I'd like to feel that I ended up being regarded as part of the community, and you don't want me out. But if collectively you do, I'm sure I'll be gone.
Okay. I don't say that in any way, shape or form because I believe that you will do anything other than a good job. I don't say that in any way, shape or form because I believe that your developing company will do anything other than what you believe to be the right thing. But what we are effectively saying, therefore, correct me if you think what I say is wrong, what you're effectively saying is that at the moment, the residents of South Cambridgeshire have the ability through their local democracy to remove the people from office who are the key strategic leaders of their area's development. And they do that straight through the ballot box for their district councillors, county councillors, mayor, or whatever. By definition, you are, since you, as you say yourself, you're not a politician, you're not an elected official, you are effectively, for people who are here, who currently have the ability here and here, your power sits up here. So therefore, effectively, for local people, if they believe that you are steering their area in the wrong direction, their route for removal for you from your position is through this up here. It is not through here. Now, there is no fundamental issue with that being a problem. I'm just very keen on making sure that we are very open from the start, that you are further away in your accountability than the currently elected local people who have responsibility for planning, for instance. Is that a fair assessment?
I accept your description with my caveats.
Okay, great, thank you. Next up, in relation to governance and democratic accountability, I believe, this is from my reading, and I will always say I stand to be corrected, that the board, the governance board of the DevCo, at present, the proposal is for there to be representation from the mayor, the county council, the district council in South Cambs and Cambridge City Council. Is that correct? Okay. And obviously they don't form a majority of that board. They are in a minority. Okay. We are about to have local government reorganisation, which means that 3 of those 4 bodies, the County Council, Cambridge City Council and South Cambridge District Council, plus possibly others, those three will be replaced by one. So therefore, by the time that you move to the most significant work you're going to be doing, rather than being 4 representatives of the local population through their councils, there will be 2. Do you have any plan to mitigate for the fact that your original level of 4 locally elected representatives is by default, when LGR happens, going to be reduced to 2?
And we have recommended to the Secretary of State that when there's 2, they should have 2 each.
Okay, next up. You talk quite a lot about, obviously, the role of the university. Why should the university in Cambridge have such power over the lives of local people when in no way, shape or form is the university a chosen or elected representative of the local people, when other equally important civil and local bodies who are not the university and don't possess the inherent power and wealth of the university are not being invited to be at the top table for your board? I've lived in villages around Cambridge my entire life, all 53 years of my life. The university doesn't speak for me. It never has. The interests of the university are not my interests. The interests of the university, forgive me for being quite so blunt, are to make profits for the university. Fundamentally, I accept the university wishes to drive development, they wish to drive employment, I accept all of that, but fundamentally the university is effectively a local business who have huge power over the lives of local people. They already sit on the GCP board. They have great ability as insider, powerful people to influence government. Why does the university get a seat at the top table when lots of other local organisations don't?
I may get the figures slightly wrong, but I think between the undergraduates, the postgraduates, the teaching staff and the other staff, it's getting on for about 35,000 people. So, I mean, it is easily the biggest employer, but it is also the thing that has spun off 26 unicorn tech startup companies. So it is a kind of engine of economic growth. I think that if it was being run all for their benefits and their land got planning instead of everybody else's land, or all affordable housing went to their key workers, that would be wrong. I think that at the moment they have 1 seat out of 7 on the advisory council to the growth company. I don't think they will have a seat as of right as the locally elected leaders will on the Development Corporation, but I would be very surprised if they weren't on it because they are the biggest employer. But I accept that they're not for everybody.
So my concern in that regard is that because they possess significant economic power, they are being given increased influence compared to others, which then makes me think to myself about the purpose, because in your earlier statement when you started, you talked a lot about you effectively talked about social, I know you didn't word the word justice, but I feel completely comfortable kind of saying that's where you're referring. So you talk very positively about the social need, social justice and such like. So therefore there's that. I will stop at that point. I have at least another 400 questions, but I will stop at that point, and I believe it is Helen Lehman.
Lovely. Councillor Lehman, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming to speak to us. As locally elected councillors, we are judged on our performance. We publish KPI reports regularly. We're scrutinised by an opposition and amongst ourselves, and we publish data on a number of key metrics. How do you judge, or first of all, how do we judge your performance? Does anybody else judge your performance? What does success look like? And when is your work done?
Peter Freeman.
I suspect my work as an individual will probably be done in about 3 years. I turned 70 at Christmas, and I thought 3 more years is plenty. Apart from age and infirmity, I think 3 years is probably enough to get an overriding operating team in place, a good chief executive in place, and a business plan in place. And the business plan is, in a sense, the glue that convinces different bits of government to give you the money, that includes how landowners transfer land or make sure give it over for development, that ensures that if we need more hospital beds or more schools, they're financed, that the new reservoir in the Fens is really happening, because at the moment there isn't, it's not really in Anglia Water's programme. We've seen the problems on Hartree and the sewage treatment. So at a personal level and at a kind of development corporation level, 3 years should set the scene, and we should be able to come back into this room, and we should not be, in a sense, telling you something if we come back in 3 years we haven't told you in between, because we should be hatching and matching the plan with you. In terms of how long it's for, I think 25 years is a sensible time. King's Cross, which I shook hands with the landowners on 26 years ago, finishes this year, and that's just one big project. So, trying to make CBC and Marshalls and Hartree and a few other things happen, extending the north of Cambourne, finishing Northstowe, finishing Waterbeach, and so on. It's not one electoral cycle, it's not one economic cycle. KPIs we are beginning to think about. When I was in the private sector, we didn't really worry about KPIs. Homes England had loads and loads and loads of KPIs put upon us by the department. And I often thought that the KPIs didn't necessarily lead to the best behaviour, because they led to artificial behaviour, or to meet artificial metrics. We will, with the Advisory Council, with the Development Corporation Board, publish KPIs, I suspect, in several drafts before adopting them. Any views on KPIs?
No, but I would just add as well that obviously we are also held to account nationally, and therefore we are scrutinised quite a lot by the department and also at present by Homes England. So I think we are quite used to that, and we want to, as Peter said, transition that into this environment. And the consultation process with the development corporation will also be a really good opportunity for people to request this and to say that would be really beneficial, so that that is very well known that that's a positive way of delivering this service within the area.
Just on one very generalised, touchy-feely one, I think sort of net positive promoter scores do mean something. You see it with country leaders. Most of them are actually negative in terms of net positive promoter. People in Cambridge ought to be saying to other people, "Yeah, I'd move here," and I'd like that to be a metric in terms of whether people in Cambridge are feeling better about it in 5 years and 10 years than today.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. So, if I understand you correctly, with the advisory board, you will be drawing up a business plan with detailed sort of actions to work to, and presumably this will be a thing that you will be measured against over time. I guess my second question, which is kind of tangential to this, is again, as elected councillors, when someone walks in to the ballot box and votes for a Liberal Democrat or for a Conservative, they know the values of that party that they're voting for. What are the values of the Cambridge Growth Company?
I think they were on that first slide, and that is about Cambridge becoming a more livable, more prosperous, more inclusive city for everyone. That includes all of the things that matter to people today. And, you know, if we'd met in this room 40 years ago, perhaps one person was already worrying about the environment. If we met in this room today, probably 90% of the people are worrying about the environment. And so, you know, what's desirable does change over time. 40 years ago, it was all about everybody should have a car outside their front door. At some extremes now, it's nobody should have a car anywhere. Everybody should do active travel or public transport, and it's finding the right balance. And across the city in South Cambridgeshire, there should be quite a lot of variation because there are different sorts of communities and different sorts of people. So the nearer it is to employment or a train station, probably the denser it should be and the less cars should be available. And further out it is, the more it should be recognising the need and benefit of having cars. But I think the overriding thing is we stand for something that works for people who live here and works for people who bring a business here.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of thinking about the wider picture of Greater Cambridge. So the population of Cambridge City is 140,000 people. The population of South Cambridgeshire is 160,000 people. I do hope that as time progresses, that the Cambridge Development Company learns more about South Cambridgeshire and its communities, and understands the relationship that we have with the city, not that we are the city. It is a different thing. I'm not sure whether that's a sort of learning process or you know, how that will happen, but many of the growth sites, the strategic growth sites, are in South Cambridgeshire. I'm a member for Camborne. There are many of us in this room who live in those strategic sites. So I hope that the focus of development in our communities isn't entirely dominated by the preferences of Cambridge, because the residents of the communities of South Cambridgeshire, I hope their voices are heard. Thank you.
So, I mean, in part just because of man hours, especially when it was kind of just Beth and me, we've not been able to kind of get out to every village and every councillor. We are about to speak to the parish council organisation. We spoke to FECRA. As our team is growing and has now grown, I would volunteer one of us to come and see any councillor about their district who wants to see us over the next 3 months.
Thank you. You'd be very welcome.
Thank you for that. Yeah, okay. Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd just like to make a comment about vision, managing vision communication, ensuring that the community, and now we're thinking about the city and the district, and also perhaps the travel to work area, how they keep a track of how the vision will develop, how they can have input to that, because I think here we're thinking vision and, emphasising perhaps against that vision how it's communicated and how we take feedback to, in a sense, modify it, correct it, bring it into line with not just expectations, but something I think that people from outside Cambridge can bring to us. So I think there's a balance to be struck, and sorry, I'll work my way around to a question, between what we as local representatives perceive about our communities, what our communities will tell us that might be new, and then the potential that you're offering through improved infrastructure, new approaches to housing and how communities might develop. Now, that's the vision thing, but we also have the need to connect that with community. So sometimes in parish council meetings we're accused of being, quotes, not transparent. And often that's down to the fact that we can be perfectly transparent, but it might take 3 or 4 hours to run through the process by which we have arrived at the information that we're trying to convey. So I think there's a dynamic about communication that needs attention. And I know it got raised in the city discussion, the possibility of citizens' assemblies. But something like citizens' assemblies that bring a wider group together. And I just want to note that a very important group in Cambridge is our youth. Now, I would include our student body, and one of the great issues for Cambridge is the retention of students. You know, the graduating students from Cambridge don't tend to like to stay in the city, and we lose talent, extraordinary amounts of talent because of that. So, so how do we maintain this vision? We're going to do something very new. The Cambridge Growth Company can really help with that, because the communication for us is, as you've said, is spread over all sorts of things. You know, we're talking about waste, we're talking about the local plan, we're talking about how parishes manage their streetlights. So here we have the possibility to create and maintain a vision, but we need to communicate, and we need to keep our residents up to date, and we need to include the youth as well, the young people who are going to take hold of this place in due course. So thoughts around that, but if I could just finish with perhaps a footnote to this. You mentioned, I think, in your introduction in the city that Copenhagen had been declared perhaps the most livable city in Europe, according to some criteria. So how, in developing that vision, do we look at how other places have done it? In other words, managed their infrastructure issue, managed some of the things that have challenged growth. And are there examples out there? How will we use, perhaps, I'll say we, how do we use those examples to help build the right picture, if you will?
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Peter Freeman.
I'll answer the last bit, and then I'm going to pass to Karen, who is our head of comms and lives in South Cambridgeshire, to kind of talk more about the interactive back and forth with the wider community. I mean, on the last bit, I'm a sad geek. I read a lot of books about urbanism, and most of the time when I go away on a holiday, it's a kind of busman's holiday, because I go to Copenhagen or something to see what's going on there. But as we get underway, beneath the DevCo and the board of the DevCo, I would envisage that we had subcommittees that were mostly made up of people who weren't on the board of the DevCo, because you don't want an enormous board, but is made up, if it's an urbanism sort of, it's made up of architects and master planners and the odd sociologist and the odd politician or whatever. If it's an environment and landscape, it's made up of ecologists and landscape architects and whatever. And we will be trying to get, as we've already started with the water scarcity group, water resources group under Dr. Paul Leinster, who was Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, the best person we can get to chair a group and have it really locked in and reporting to the board. On comms, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are, and thank you for pointing out that the dynamic around communication does need attention, because we absolutely agree with you. And I guess as a direct answer, there are sort of multiple sort of areas that we need to get into here. I mean, Peter, when he joined the Cambridge Growth Company a couple of years ago, I mean, he has been out and about, and Beth and others in the team as we have grown, we've been out and about speaking to lots of different organisations and lots of different individuals. I think there's a list of around about 200 somewhere as we've been going out and about and talking really about what Cambridge Growth Company is here to try and help local communities achieve. So there's a very sort of real live conversation that's happening at the moment, but also there's, you know, a huge amount of engagement with local communities that's happening around their vision for growth, what they want to see from good growth, where they want to see this good growth that is being led by the shared planning service, and of course multiple different engagement pieces that are being led by local authorities and other organisations as well, who are deeply engaged in their local communities and are generating a rich sense and understanding of what their communities really value. So what we would like to do, and are increasingly doing, is to learn from that engagement and see where we can really help and add value, and not replicate or duplicate that, but actually build on that. And we do want to be continuing to be working with the shared planning service and those other organisations to reach deeper into those communities and genuinely have those conversations around what the future looks like and what they want to see their growth company and a development corporation, should government proceed with setting one up, what they want to do with that as well. But equally, just in terms of setting out the ambitions and the priorities from local communities, is very much deeply embedded in the structure that we currently have with the Growth Company, and that's through the Advisory Council. And obviously we've got Bridget and the other leaders there who are absolutely championing what the priorities are for their communities and what the local Growth Company needs to focus on. And also we would hope that if the Development Corporation sets up, that, you know, when committees start to evolve, Peter's already explained that actually we should be bringing those local voices in, those expert voices in, to ensure that continues.
Councillor Stobart.
Perhaps to add to that, some of the digital tools that I know the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service has been using, you know, to visualise and to understand, you know, the impact of a particular set of planning decisions would take. I think there's huge scope for that, and perhaps one of the issues there is making sure that members of our communities can experience that kind of visualisation, not just the councillors, but actually our residents who would care deeply about how things would look. I don't think we should forget also that, you know, we're talking about the lives of individuals here, and the kind of impact can often be very well illustrated by a use case or an individual experience that can be told as a bit of a narrative. And so that might be a very useful way of bringing out some of these things. But I think the bottom line is, you know, this is a hugely challenging project which really deserves to have the very best tools and techniques, and I hope we can keep pushing on the boundaries of consultation methods and representation methods. So just my view on that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll come on to Councillor Paul Bearpark.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to meet with us this evening. I suppose I am sceptical about the suitability of a development corporation for Greater Cambridge, and I suppose having not known much about development corporations until this came along and read up a bit more, it seems that other development corporations have been focused on kind of green fields, if it's Milton Keynes, or perhaps regeneration projects such as London Docklands. But here we have a kind of existing community with lots of highly valued assets, whether they're historic, environmental, or social, or cultural. And people in the area do have some very strongly held views about those. So I was wondering what alternatives have been considered other than a development corporation for Greater Cambridgeshire, or are being considered.
Peter Freeman.
I think sort of question one, probably on the consultation paper when it goes out, is do you agree with the idea that essentially a development corporation? And clearly that is a big question. I think it's the only sort of vehicle that I really know of that sits between either central government doing something or local government doing something. And it's a vehicle which can have a long life. It's a vehicle that can have statutory powers but not use them if they're not necessary. And it's a vehicle that has an intense focus because it has a limited purpose. And I mean, on scale, and you're right in a sense, Milton Keynes or many of the 1950s, 60s, 70s new towns were mostly greenfield, although they absorbed places like Bletchley or whatever, so they absorbed existing market towns. Cambridge is already an existing kind of travelled work area. It's an existing kind of magnet on a scale far different from any kind of market town that got absorbed into a new town. And I suppose what I believe passionately, I'm only doing this because I believe in it, is that to mend the problems across an area at least as wide as sort of 6 Mile Bottom to Cambourne or Waterbeach to Whittlesford needs an organisation that has expertise, muscle and longevity and is as little as possible exposed to economic cycles and political cycles.
Councillor Paul Bearpark.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand why, for instance, other options haven't been explored, such as bolstering our own planning team, for instance, with, and bringing that expertise into our own planning team, rather than creating almost another level of governance alongside the complex governance that we already have. And is, everyone, I think, agrees is quite troublesome and complex.
You have officially the best planning team in the country. You have a large planning team, and they do a very good job. But I think it's where the sort of viability, the land ownership, and the infrastructure, and funding them all come together, which is where we can add something.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. And in fact, my colleague has started on the line that I wanted to raise with you, given that you've acknowledged that South Cambridgeshire and the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service is an award-winning service. What value do you think the Cambridge Growth Company will add without duplicating the work that we all do? I'll ask you that first.
Let's take that one first, and then we'll come back to Councillor Bradnam. Peter Freeman. Beth.
Thanks, Peter. I think the way we're looking at the advantages of the Development Corporation are looking at it in the whole. So I think if you were to just say, looking at the planning element of it and trying to do a comparison, it's not looking at the benefits of a sort of systems approach of looking at the suite of powers that a development corporation has provided. And Peter touched on it with the integration of the balance sheet, the funding capabilities, the ability to leverage private sector financing, the commercial expertise that will help in leveraging that additional private sector financing, the ability to convince Treasury that you're able to do that so that they release more money, the ability to make sure that you've got long-term growth plans where there's certainty of levels of growth that are required in order to justify the funding and the balance sheet, but also to justify, as we said earlier, things like mass rapid transit, and to provide market confidence that we're trying to really attract and bring in that interest and market confidence into Cambridge. And it's bringing all of these together so that, but as Peter said, dedicating it to the really strategic sites and ensuring that you are trying to shift the needle in the ways where you can get the optimal outcomes. So it isn't trying to take over much of the activity that is exemplar in this area. It is trying to add the value on those strategic sites and securing the funding, having a longer term time frame horizon, probably planning on a different basis to how local plans are asked to plan, and factoring in the economic potential in order to justify higher levels as well of housing that can support it, and bring alongside the infrastructure, the housing and the jobs all together. So I think we sort of look at it more as that systems approach, rather than doing a direct comparison of one element of it, because it's how the whole comes together that adds the value.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. So then a little bit more, because we're still talking about governance. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the representation and how meetings will be held. So, for example, will meetings all be held in public? And given that you're I'll give you a few, then you can come back on some of them. For example, you've talked very much about Cambridge University, but what about Anglia Ruskin, which is the second university, or another university in Cambridge? But also, where is the representation from the business interests, which are throughout South Cambridgeshire? They're not all in the city, you know. So where is that balance coming from in the construction of the committee, but also, you know, how will those meetings be held?
Peter Freeman.
I'll let Beth talk more about governance and in private or not, because she understands government processes probably better than I do.
Okay.
In terms of what you said about Anglia Ruskin and universities, we've met with Anglia Ruskin too. Within the sort of subcommittees I've talked about, I would certainly expect an education one, and I'd expect them to be on it, and I think they have more relevance to some of the kind of general skills training than the university. In terms of the business community, we've probably met with the half dozen biggest employers directly, but we talk very regularly to Cambridge Ahead, Innovate Cambridge and the Chambers of Commerce, and would again set up a kind of business roundtable. Beth?
Just to add on to the particularly links with Cambridge Ahead, who we meet on a very regular basis, and actually they have adopted one of their strategic aims to actually support the growth company and help to have that collaborative approach with us. So that's a really important relationship for us, and is incredibly helpful, particularly because a lot of they've got such a data focus to how they approach things as well, which is really beneficial to us. In relation to the transparency, we are recommending as part of the Development Corporation, but it will be part of the consultation, and our view would be that there needs to be transparency and to have that approach with public meetings and availability of papers, etc. So that isn't something that, you know, is subject to the consultation and people's views on that, but it would be something we recommend.
Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. So on the basis of the answers that you've just given, actually what I'm concerned about is it sounds so there might be a possibility of duplicating the work of the Combined Authority, who also have this wider view, including education, skills training, transport, and I'm just wondering, how are you going to work with the Combined Authority?
So we've been talking to the Combined Authority for the past couple of years, and we are mapping out exactly what their plans are, what they're looking to build into their growth plan, their SDS and spatial development strategies, and how we can complement, and so that we don't, because I think as long as we are collaborating and we're working together, we understand what each party's doing. What we're trying to do is, as sort of Karen said with the engagement piece, is really try to build upon work that is already in place, but try to look at where we can add value and how we can look to create better opportunities, be it skills or skills academies on sites or whatever it might be, and look at where those opportunities are, where we can help bring that forwards. But it will be a partnership approach, and it needs to be.
Thank you for that. Is that okay, Councillor Bradham? If we, yeah. Councillor Peter Fane.
Thank you, Chair, and my apologies having missed some of the earlier comments. I shall try to compensate by being brief with no footnotes. I think many of us will be encouraged by what you said about local plans and about the shared planning service, which we're proud of. There are, of course, two aspects to the planning process. You've spoken of various committees that might be possible. There's the development planning, but there's also the development control and management. And we see that as a, sometimes referred to as a quasi-judicial process that we're involved in there. How do you see the development corporation taking that on in relation to the larger sites? Do you have any particular plans for that and how that might be done?
This actually came up yesterday. Days flat. All four leaders came virtually in person to meet with Matthew Pennycook yesterday, and one of the things we were discussing is kind of what the threshold is for a development corporation to stick its oar in on development management, and the department had been arguing for a relatively low threshold. I had been arguing for a higher threshold, and with the help of the leaders yesterday, I'm hoping that the consultation document will have a much clearer strategic level. So, you know, we are certainly not wanting to take the role of a local authority planning committee for 99% of schemes. In terms of manpower, we have to discuss it, and Stephen is beginning to sort of share with us the kind of cross-make-up business plan of his 140 planning officers and how bigger schemes tend to pay for it more because of planning performance agreements and whatever. And we will need to work out the best accommodation between service level agreements, taking on people or whatever. We must ensure stability for your department. We must ensure that people working in the department feel that their jobs are safe one way or the other, but the actual final kind of shape is to be worked out.
Councillor Fane.
Thank you, Chair. It's partly the democratic legitimacy that I was getting at. You know, things go before a planning committee in part because the residents like to feel that their concerns have been aired and listened to in an open and transparent way. And that may be more difficult for a development corporation committee to take on and to satisfy residents about.
I don't think it makes it in any way harder for them to be aired. I think in some ways it may make it easier for them to be aired. I've talked to councillors in the London Legacy Development Corporation, the Old Olympic area, which involves 4 local authorities, and Old Oak Common, which involves 3 local authorities. In each case, there's an independent chair who is in some way a kind of planning expert. In each case, the local authorities are all represented on the board. And what I've been consistently told is the local authority representatives feel they can be as unguarded as they want in the interests of stating what their own electorate feel. But ultimately, if there is a deemed greater interest, it can go through. And I think that's actually, in terms of delivering the right outcomes, a not unhealthy balance.
Thank you for that. Councillor Martin Khan.
This point is partly raised by Councillor Bearpart. You're talking about the development corporation, so I take the assumption that a development corporation goes ahead. Looking back at development corporations in the past, they were introduced for new towns, were largely cohesive blocks of land, or cohesive blocks of land in urban areas, but the new towns had one advantage, is that they could look for new forms of urban development, and some of them, you have the contrast between, for instance, Milton Keynes, which is an extensive development, which has often been complained as a car-based city, but actually studies have shown that actually you use less energy for getting to work in Milton Keynes because the traffic is more fluently. So, I mean, there were original ideas, and Runcorn's another one where you have a figure-of-8 busway to serve the town. Now you come here with an area which is a dispersed development of a large area, very different from those. Do you wish to just try and follow the existing form of development of spokes coming out from a city, but with dispersed areas of development around it? Or would you be looking at some original new form of urban form, for instance, something like Runcorn or Randstad, where you've got a circular form of development, for instance, joining the new developments? How do you see that? I mean, that obviously, of course, is going to be difficult for public appreciation because people don't like things that are new and such new structures. How do you see that in relation to both the democratic questions and the opportunities? I'm just interested to see how you see that working in this area.
Thank you.
One of the reasons that we want a big red line, rather than saying, after being sort of part-time visitors for only a couple of years, here are our answers, is we think that the allocation of anything beyond your local plan should go with a vision of a comprehensive transport solution. And the first mayor kind of had one answer that was almost certainly not viable, and a lot of people thought was wasting money. We need to find something that makes sense, is viable, is popular, is accepted. We need to share it and bring in expertise. Are we able to say who our expert is yet or not? Okay. I have been looking for really quite a long time for an extra member of the Advisory Council who is a strategic transport expert. And I think I've sort of speed dated about 15 people who claim to be strategic transport experts. And eventually, on the recommendation of Peter Hendy, who's the rail minister, we have found somebody who I think really is the real McCoy and will be joining the Advisory Council shortly. We are also in the next 2 or 3 weeks. What are we?
So the work is underway to procure the consultants to support on the strategic outline business case for the mass rapid transit system. So we're doing this collaboratively with the combined authority, as Nathan referenced in the slides earlier, and that work is underway. In addition to that, we've been working with the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy Group to look at the emerging plans in that space, but also commissioned our own transport advisors to help support the evidence base, to help to look at what are those different models for the sort of network, if you like. At this stage, both of those are technology agnostic, but looking to make sure that they're future-proof. But it's really about understanding what the network needs are, and then the first stages of starting to talk. And it's been actually quite an important development with both Treasury and DFT standing behind this strategic outline business case, because having their buy-in at this early stage is, it really does help, and it was a challenge to secure, shall we say. So that's a positive in terms of how we can start to plan and take things forwards.
Councillor Khan.
I'm just going to say that it if you come up with a new transport solution, a new transport vision, it's important that this is determined fairly soon, because the major developments that are taking place at the satellite developments are still in a stage where they could be modified, but you may get to a stage fairly soon where it's going to be, putting any new development in is going to be very, very difficult, any new form. So that's just a comment in terms of looking forward.
Thank you. I think we'll move on from there. Councillor Richard Williams.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just a declaration of interest I should put on the record, because my employer has been mentioned several times.
No
but
problem.
I will say I tend to agree with Councillor Drew, actually. It gets far too close to governing.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Hansraj.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on hospitals. Are you going to have new hospitals built because the population will grow? Or are you going to leave just Addenbrooke's? And if you are going to have new hospitals, what will you do about the workforce required to, not just hospitals, schools, etc.?
Peter Freeman.
I mean, clearly, if there's population growth, there has to be at least equal growth in the availability of school places and doctor surgeries and hospital beds. One of the first meetings we had when we came up here was with Mike Leach and Professor Maxwell at Addenbrooke's, and I said to them, if Cambridge got much bigger, you know, do you just sort of double the size of Addenbrooke's, or do you have branch hospitals? And it was interesting because they both had an immediate sort of clannish answer of it all goes to Addenbrooke, and then they both sort of double took and said, no, actually, you know, if it is kind of cutting edge new research medicine, it probably goes to Addenbrooke's, but there should definitely be other places, in part because of the traffic for the patients and getting it closer to the patients. When I went to Abbey People, I was told it can take over an hour by public transport to get to Addenbrooke, so that's not great. And I'm also told, I'm not a medical expert, maybe we need to get one of those onto our advisory council, but the chair of the hospital group is on our advisory council. There are changing patient care ways so that probably there will be less long-term hospital beds. I don't know, but it's absolutely critical that we see that the provision grows in proportion.
Thank you for that.
No, just have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Are you saying that Addenbrooke's will change ways they look after patients, so there will be room for people? I mean, Cambridge has already grown and they're struggling with beds already. And you have plans to expand Cambridge, your Cambridge Growth Company. How is this serving the needs of the people? Addenbrooke's can't cope with what it has already, the workload. And they're saying that they can manage with the growth in population. Have I understood that correctly?
So I think one of the first things we did, which I mentioned in the early slides, was as Peter said, we've been talking to the Hospital Trust at Addenbrooke's for a number of years now, and we recognise there are some significant challenges to unlock hospitals across the country. So that is something we've been working with them to try to look at. How can we make sure that the provision meets the population need? Not only, we know there's a deficit already, so we know that this is a critical problem here and now, and we need to ensure that the provision, be it in more different forms of clinical delivery, be it the sort of virtual wards, but there will be needs for new hospitals, and that is something that needs to be built into the infrastructure plans going forwards. Obviously, it's quite a challenging infrastructure requirement to provide a solution to, and that's why we will need to particularly look at convening people across Whitehall in this space. I actually had a meeting earlier today and raised this exact problem, that how do we make sure that you get the unification across the various different parts of Whitehall to come together for this growth plan? That has to be done in order for this to be a success, and hospital provision as the population grows is an absolute necessity. We started off by funding a new clinical model study to help to inform the type of hospital provision that would be needed, and that has been something that we've been working with the Hospital Trust on, and they've completed that first business case, which will help to ensure that the design of any new hospital is optimised, is a world-leading exemplar, and helps to also provide the justification in the cases going forwards. But we will have to work very closely with the Department of Health in this, and work across government to make sure that the sequencing comes online as and when it is needed. And that is a big challenge, but it's something that we're working on.
Thank you for that. Councillor Earl. Councillor Earl, I don't think your mic is working. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we heard from the Trust just before Christmas talking about their plans for the future. I think you do need to look very critically at what is being said. We, at the moment, Addenbrooke's, as has been said, is not coping. We have historically in this country, over the last 60 years, lost 75% of our hospital beds. It's great talking about virtual wards, and it solves a problem in planning, but there are people who cannot be cared for in virtual wards. It doesn't work, and what you end up having is admissions, readmissions, discharges, readmissions. And this is what is causing major problems at Addenbrooke's. A lot of the people that go in and out of there are not able to cope, not able to manage at home, and the services are just not meeting that. We're just salami slicing our health services. Community services aren't keeping up. And I'm just wondering how you're going to overcome that, because you will be given all sorts of ideas about brand new ways of dealing with things, but actually they are being tried and they're not working particularly well. I think we have to take a step back and just look at what is needed in the community and what people are actually saying about what is being provided now, and how a massive growth in population, which is going to be very significant, is going to be dealt with along those lines.
Thank you for that, Peter Freeman.
I mean, I think I agree, and the clinical model is a part of it, but it's not the entirety of it, and that is the we need to continue to work and look at those needs and make sure that any built form is suitable for the future population needs, as much as understanding how you can leverage, because for some people the virtual wards and that thing will work and it can relieve some of the pressure, but for others it won't. So we are really keen to work more closely, and we are working closely with the University Trust to understand that, but it's taking that and taking that back into Whitehall as well, to then understand how can we, as I said, bring the parties together, so the sequencing of any growth plans means that infrastructure, including hospitals, forms a part of that growth plan, and it's understood that it's a necessary part of it.
And the other thing I'd add is anything you have that is kind of statistical evidence that you can feed to us, we will very happily feed back to Westminster.
Thank you for that. Did you want to come back, Councillor Earl?
Just briefly to say, yes, I mean, that is a crux of it. We have seen an attrition in the number of hospital beds over the years, and it's been almost a government policy to do it. And you see two old hospitals close down, you'll see one new one come, and it will have fewer beds. And it has a knock-on effect. But it's not just hospitals, it's community services and how they intermesh. And at the moment, that in this area is not working particularly well. And Addenbrooke's are only one side of it. Technical care and treatment is one thing, but actually bringing community services into that as well the GP services are not really coping that well at the moment, and that is something we need to see, and how the regional treatment centres that are being talked about would come in.
Is there a particular officer or councillor who is most expert on this that we should be in touch with? Are you volunteering?
Well done, Councillor
I may
Earl.
not be here much longer. It is an interest.
No, but in seriousness, we can give that some thought in terms of, there's a number of people involved with, like Councillor Hansraj and so forth, that are involved with health that might want to make some representations in that respect. So we'll come back to you on that, so that's reasonable. I've got two more speakers, so I've got Councillor Hobro and Councillor Bygott. If we could just keep things moving fairly quickly, and then we will come on to some, just to make sure we've covered the other subjects. I'm fully aware that we've branched into a lot of things in this section, which is fair enough, and that's fine.
Can we be reminded of the subject so that people can focus on
of
where
course,
their subject?
we'll bring them up on screen for you shortly. I think it was Councillor Bygott first. Councillor Bygott.
Thank you, Chairman. So I've got two questions on transport, and I wasn't sure if we're on item 2 yet.
I think we'll come on to Councillor Hobro, and I'll come back to you shortly. But I accept, yeah, Councillor Hobro.
So I had two questions. One was on the local plan, and the other was on transport. So
do the local plan one, Councillor Hobro.
Okay. Thank you. I was very encouraged to hear many of the introductory comments and in response to some of the earlier questions. So you talked about sustainable growth of high quality, you talked about mixed use neighbourhoods, green spaces, rewarding jobs and training, integrating public services, and a focus on net zero. And these all sound very familiar, hopefully to anyone who's been reading our local plan. The highlighting of water and transport is also very familiar to anyone who's been reading the local plan. And you also spoke favourably about the emerging local plan and mentioned the spatial strategy, and I think spoke favourably about the spatial strategy within that plan as well. So really my question was that, well, we're after this meeting, of course, we'll be going back to parish councils, we'll be going back to residents and answering questions. And one of the first questions people will have will be, how do the plans of the growth company affect what we've seen in the local plan, which of course is what this planning authority has laid out to our residents and businesses in terms of our, the democratic processes by which we declare our intentions for growth and for planning. So really to come to my question, in broad terms, one of the ways that I might interpret the things you've said so far is to say that you would like to facilitate the delivery of the local plan. So clearly, many of the things you've talked about, helping with transport and water, they would facilitate the delivery of the local plan that we have in consultation at the moment.
Councillor Hobro, let's take that first, because that's an important point.
Yeah. May I just formulate it as properly as a question? So am I right to interpret it like that the main focus in planning terms would be to facilitate the delivery, or is there an intention of the growth company to build significantly on the plan? And if so, would that be within the spatial strategy, or might it be further to the spatial strategy? Thank you.
So you're right, we've been clear that we're fully supportive and think Stephen and the team have done a fantastic job with the draft local plan. We are trying to facilitate individual sites and work through the complexities of those sites and help to support them. And that, I think, has been shown by some of the investments, for example, in CSET in the last year around helping to fund it through to the Transport and Works Act order. In terms of how there might be an impact, maybe the work we've been doing with East West Rail might be a good example to just sort of try to frame it a bit better, that if there is an opportunity for a train station at Cambridge East, and obviously that has now been included in the DCO for East West Rail, then we can start to look differently at that site, as long as some of the other constraints, including water and transport, wider transport needs, are addressed. So we are supportive, but we're also looking for opportunities. But we're looking for opportunities where they can also be evidenced by activity and progress made in the other critical areas of current infrastructure barriers. So it will be an evolving process, and we're working very closely with the Shared Planning Service to identify those opportunities and try and work through them.
So as chair, can I just be clear on that? So the answer is yes, that you will be working towards the local plan and facilitating the local plan, but yes, you do intend to go over and above the local plan in terms of housing delivery.
It's not just about housing delivery. I mean, obviously, it's about making sure that we can secure the economic potential of Cambridge as well. So, just to be clear, it's not.
But on the
programme.
point of housing delivery and housing numbers, because I think that's what parish councillors will be concerned about. They will say it's not very clear at the minute. They will say we don't know the terms, we don't know the parameters geographically, we don't know the housing numbers, and this is an unelected, another layer of government that is making very big decisions which might be replicated via other layers of government like the GCP. And I don't think it is very clear. I don't think parish councillors understand it. I don't know if that's because of comms or because the message isn't getting out there. I don't fully understand it myself. And it's normally district councillors delivering reports to parish councils that try to get those questions and concerns answered. But on Councillor Hobro's point, I don't think that might be because you don't know those things yet. But I think if that is the case, you need to communicate that you don't know those things and be honest around, is this a vehicle for more, whether it's transport links, what will this result in? Because people are very unsure. And I've heard a lot of talking around that, but not clear answers on what will this result in, how will it be measured? I'm not hearing that clearly. So, Councillor Hobro, continue.
Thank you. So I think you've answered the first part of my question very thoroughly. I wondered if I could just tease out a little more on the spatial strategy element. So you did speak favourably about the spatial strategy earlier on in talking about the key sites that have been identified in the local plan are supported by sometimes existing and sometimes additional infrastructure. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about your ideas on the spatial strategy compared with the way that it's laid out in the local plan. Again, this is an important element that a lot of people will be asking questions about. So we'd love to have some clarity on your views on that. Thank you.
So I think the clarity is that we're supportive of the local plan as it is. Where there are large strategic sites, we are looking to see whether or not there are significant infrastructure barriers that might mean that those sites are not optimised, and that's why I think the Cambridge East is a good example of that. But it is focused on the really large strategic sites where there is an opportunity for something like, as I said, an example of a new train station obviously changes the transport capacity of a site, and that will both impact housing numbers and jobs numbers. But that can't, and there is a reason why everything is set out at the moment in the local plan, because this is dependent on future changes being addressed and future increases in those transport capacities. And until we have secured that, then they are not things that are on the table, but that is our intent, to try to look to optimise, and only where we are providing the right infrastructure to support it. And that infrastructure is obviously, as we know, there are significant problems with water and transport in this area, so there's some absolute focus areas for us to be able to reach that point.
Councillor Hobro.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, that answers my first question very well. I do have a question about transport, but I think perhaps Councillor
I think
Bygot is ahead of me.
stop there for a minute. So I think what we'll do is move on. I do intend to, is it very, if it's on this point, very, very briefly? Yeah.
Chair?
Yeah.
No, it's not brief. But,
no? Okay. Then maybe we should move on.
Could I just say, it touches on exactly what Councillor Hobro's been talking about, but perhaps crosses over into funding and investment in affordable housing. So if you want to hold my question, it's aligned with how do we deliver the local plan more quickly. But given the time constraints, I'll glad to come back to it later.
Yeah, we'll wait and yeah.
No. What Councillor Stobart is referring to sounds still like governance in item 1.
Yeah,
and I'm
no,
just suggesting, can we have a pause before we move on to item 2, please?
So I think we'll have a break at 7:30, but we'll move on now. So we'll come on to transport. Councillor Bygot.
Thank you, Chairman. Many countries plan their infrastructure many decades in advance. And when you look at a map, there'll be dotted lines that say, this is where a future motorway goes, or this is a future railway. In the UK, we have a term for that called planning blight. And we have a sort of a system where anybody who wants to build a railway is competing for a piece of land with somebody who wants to build a block of flats or offices. And we've had something of a sort of a building boom in recent years of blocks of flats that are right next to railway lines. And then that, of course, makes it much more expensive if you want to full track them. And so my question is, it was mentioned before that the MRT study, there's a sort of a minimum level of development to make things like that viable. So how do we make sure that we safeguard routes for those kinds of things between now and the time when certain types of transport are going to be viable? And it was also mentioned before, future-proofing transport corridors. And if, for example, we make a decision that buses are the right solution for our transport, and we note that buses have a very tight turning circle, and that it's much cheaper if we design all of our routes with very tight right angles in them, because that obviously saves money. And what happens then if we later discover that we need trams or trains or some other form where that's not appropriate anymore? Thanks.
So they're all very, very good questions, and that's why we're taking our time looking at these issues, and we are not saying this is where everything's going and this is where new growth is going. We are in the middle of working on evidence base, and as I said, we've got transport consultants working with us. We are working with the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy Group as well to understand their emerging strategy. That all needs to come together. I think there is also obviously time for us to develop this, because as we're saying, we are looking to follow on from the local plan. So the next period for us really is about having that considered view and making sure that longer term plans can be drawn up that are then supplemented with the sort of spatial growth that will come in the future that builds upon the local plan. But it needs to be looked at in a considered way, as you've set out, so that we can keep testing those questions and saying, how future-proof is it? And you know, technology is changing all the time in the world that we live in, so we need to be adaptable to that, and that is part of the way we're approaching it.
Councillor Bygot. Please do.
Sorry, at South Cambridgeshire District Council, we represent 105 villages and 2 towns. Many of those villages have very poor public transport links. Some of them have few, if any. And it was mentioned before the notion of having some areas more dense, for example, around railway stations, and other areas further out being less dense. So one of the sort of things that can lead into is saying, well, we'll ban cars from going anywhere near railway stations because therefore we don't. That's not an appropriate place to have cars. But my question is, and this is really on behalf of the many people in South Cambridgeshire who don't have good public transport now is how do they, given that every journey has to start in the car, how do they get on the train if they're not allowed to drive to the station? Thank you.
Peter Freeman.
I think that it would be premature for us to be saying that we're starting to put bans around driving to the station. I mean, we need to be considerate of the needs of all of the community, and in many places, and particularly sort of polycentric places, there will need to have cars, and particularly in rural communities as well. We need to ensure that our transport strategy work is looking at how you align the car use where it is appropriate, but maximise the public transport use and the sustainability benefits that you're going to get from that. So I take on board your question, and it will be something that we are thinking about as we go through that work.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Bygott?
And just to sort of summarise that point, one of the things we really need to do is say, if this is the core of where we have public transport, and around the periphery, this is where people are driving, to really think about the question of what is the interface between those zones, and how do we plan it so that there are places to move from one zone into the other. And that's just a sort of a plea to consider that as you go forward.
Thank you for that. Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. So, you've mentioned a couple of times, well, several times actually, mass rapid transport, and you've also mentioned light rail. So can you please explain what plans you have for such a mass rapid transport system, bearing in mind that we already have coming through the system, or trying to come through the system, Cambourne to Cambridge busway, Cambridge South East Transport Link, the Waterbeach to Cambridge busway, and indeed also East West Rail. So I'm wondering what you're planning and how that will, the work that you do will mesh with the Combined Authority, the GCP, and the other planning bodies that work on transport.
I mean, just in relation to plans that you have developed over the years, we have consistently supported Cambourne to Cambridge. I gave evidence for it. We have, I think, provided £7 million for CSET being driven forward. And while in time it may be that there are different forms of transport to guided buses that go down those corridors, we accept that you as the local experts, after long consideration with Peter Blake, have concluded they are the right corridors, and we're backing them. Going forward, as we said earlier, we are just taking on board an individual as a strategic transport consultant, and we're just completing the procurement of a firm of engineers. So we don't have proposals as yet.
For clarity then, when you're referring to mass rapid transport, you're referring to our existing plans?
No, well, existing plans, plus if there is something affordable that moves more people more quickly, then we would look to that too. But I think we are assuming that the corridors you have identified should be implemented.
And does that include the light rail? Did you have a plan for light rail?
So as I said earlier, our work at the moment is technology agnostic. So we know that there is interest in light rail in the area, and that is one of the things from a viability and deliverability perspective we have to look into as part of this work. And this work is, as we say, just starting. So we're just going out tendering for competitive bids to come and help us with that work. So we have worked together with the CPCA and looked at a scope. So when the commission, when we were given the commission from the Department of Communities, Local Government, Housing, and also DFT and Treasury, that was also shared with CPCA. So we made sure that we were complementary and working together on it. And then we have a governance meeting that oversees that programme of work that also dovetails into the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy. So it is an opportunity to look at, if you were planning for longer term than other plans have been able to, what might you be able to deliver if you also factor in potentially higher growth, so you've got higher capacity to justify it, and that's really at a strategic level. It's really looking at what are those parameters that might need to be true, and is that something that the Greater Cambridge area would be able to provide, so that we can start to then take that forward. So it's an early stage, but the baseline is assuming that the planned transport corridors are in place, and this would be to build upon that as a mass rapid transit system, but technology agnostic at this stage.
Thank you for that. Okay, I think we'll move on. So, Councillor James Hobro, if I could just remind councillors to try and keep their questions concise so we can move through them.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, it's clear that growth requires a shift in the type of transport that we have in this area towards a greater role for public transport and for cycling, while retaining a mixed system. I mean, this has been acknowledged for many years in Cambridge, and there have been many attempts to sort of smooth that process. And this is partly about big ticket investment projects. So I noticed that in the papers for today, then you talked about securing 7 million for CSET, and you also talked about C2C. So these are both big ticket transport projects. But in this area, so we're a rural district with many villages, and for a lot of residents, the only realistic way of improving public transport would be to improve the bus network. And so that means, you know, a bus service between villages and local hubs, and a bus service between villages and Cambridge, essentially, or an improved service. The GCP has been around for 12 years now, I think, and has delivered some really significant improvements in capital projects. So these are big improvements in the arterial routes in Cambridge, and projects like C2C, for example. However, bringing improvements to the bus network is something that practically no one has managed to make significant progress in recently. And this seems to be because there isn't a way to do that through this capital investment model. So now in my ward, I get a lot of questions about why are the buses so frequent, why are they not turning up, all this sort of thing. A lot of the transport issues that we face seem to be related to the ineffectiveness of our bus service. We've had the prospect of franchising coming along in the next few years, but it sounds as if that might be stalling. So really, this brings me to my question. Do you think that this model of focusing on capital investment is sufficient, or are you looking for other routes to try and improve transport? And in particular, how would you help this area to get improved bus services, as many other cities have a much better bus service than this area around Cambridge? Thanks.
Peter Freeman.
So I think we, in the first instance, we have to wait to see what is coming out as part of the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy. It is the first step in this journey, and that will give us an indication as to how can we build upon that, and what else can we do. And we are working, as I said, quite closely with CPCA and other officers who are part of that Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy group. I do agree, and I recognise that those improvements need to be made. I don't think I've got the answers here today for you, but we need to look at all of the available options and have a look at viability, deliverability, and what the challenges are in delivering those.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hobro.
So thanks. I mean, acknowledging that we're at an early stage on dealing with these issues, I think is I understand that. I mean, my main point would be to highlight the fact that these large capital investments can only do so much, and that there are key areas like improving bus provision that just don't seem to be solvable by that mechanism. So I hope that the growth company will be looking at looking more widely than that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I'll bring Councillor Susan van der Van online, I think.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, lovely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the beginning, you talked about growth benefiting all, the fact that pockets of deprivation exist in many, if not most of our communities. And you mentioned social justice in transport. We've heard about new train stations, but we have a number of existing small stations which are held back in their potential to serve local people due to a lack of accessibility in all its forms, not just step-free access, but access to the station, whether by active travel or by bus. I would like to ask, is the growth company thinking about improvements in public transport infrastructure, such as these small stations, in existing communities that may sit outside of major growth settlements? Thank you.
Peter Freeman.
I think it's an excellent point, and we will look into it.
Lovely. Okay. Lovely. Okay, we'll move on. Councillor Paul Bearpark.
Thank you, Chair. You've mentioned Waterbeach Station on a couple of occasions. Yeah, as you're aware, the station is being relocated, and sorry, I must declare an interest here. I live in Waterbeach, and I benefit from the existing station. Network Rail, I believe, is going to consult on the closure of the existing station, which I understand to be a complex and relatively expensive process. And I suppose what I would like to know is whether you would consider looking at keeping the existing station open for the benefit of the existing villagers as well as the new station, and whether you would, during the consultation, reach out to Network Rail and ask them to keep the existing station open.
Peter Freeman.
I mean, I think that really is a Network Rail decision, and I presume it's about overall delay in passenger movements, but I'm very happy to ask the question.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand whether the benefits of keeping the existing station open have been properly assessed.
Lovely. Okay, you'll take that on board. And,
yeah, we'll take that on board
away.
and take that away. It's not something that we've got the detail on at this point in time.
Lovely. Councillor Richard Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So, yeah, I'll keep it brief. We can sometimes be very surprised at discovering certain desire lines for people's travel. And I just like to urge, and I think you've already said that, that gathering evidence as to how people are preferring to travel, and we found, for example, from the northern villages to West Cambridge, was beginning to create a flow of people. And it was a bit influenced by where the childcare was. And we hadn't really realised that. It came up during a discussion with residents. There are all sorts of surprising kind of phenomena that take place within the Cambridge area. And just like to underline the importance of smart data gathering around where people are going. New transport links have the possibility, because they foreshorten time between places, to actually stimulate growth. So it's not just supplying a need. You know, the number 6 bus in Girton should go more frequently, of course it should, but if we propose a new transport link, it will pull places together, and I think that can be a means of growth. So again, a comment that this transport kind of set of transport proposals can be quite complex in that sense, that you meet a need, but you also stimulate a kind of development of capacity, or a development of need. And then just third point, which I think has been mentioned by others, but we should not be ignoring the east and the north. Yeah, quite a lot of what we've talked about has been kind of south-facing, but south and west-facing, but the east and the north also draw in a lot of people, and there are things like Ely North Junction development, which is critical to that easy flow of people. We go as far as Wisbech, and the need perhaps for people to be eased in their commute from Wisbech into Cambridge. There are people who commute in on the A14 from as far as West Suffolk to come and work on the biomedical campus. So that all these different spaces, we shouldn't ignore any of them. So it's really a set of comments, Chair, if that's okay, and if there is a response, yeah, value it.
are they noted? Yeah, or yeah, okay. So we'll move on. I've got two more speakers, then we'll have a short break. So we've got Councillor Richard Williams next, and then I'll come on to Councillor Helen Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep it short. So just a few points, comments, slight questions. I mean, if we're talking about mass rapid transit, I think it does need to be mass and does need to cover the whole area. I mean, if you think of Cambridge as a sort of clock, really the two transport corridors cover 3:45, but the rest of it's not covered at all. So that's the problem with corridors. They tend to be narrow. So those two transport corridors do nothing for vast swathes of the area around Cambridge. I think a mass transit system needs to be something that encompasses the whole of the area. And I mean, the other point I'd make as well, which I think would be a good focus for your inquiry, is to make better use of the current public transport infrastructure. So to give, I'm sure you know, I'm reluctant to mention it given what you said earlier, but there is a train station in Whittlesford, and it takes you into Cambridge, but Cambridge station is 20 minutes outside of Cambridge. I work in the centre of Cambridge, it's easier for me to drive. What we really need is you get to Cambridge station, you hop on a tram, and that tram takes you into the centre. It takes you out to the West Cambridge site. It even maybe takes you up to the north of Cambridge. That would revolutionise the way people use the current system. At the moment, you just get dumped somewhere in the middle of the city, 20 minutes away from the centre. It doesn't really appeal to people as a viable way of commuting. So I think thinking about how we can make better use of what we've got as well should be important.
Lovely. I think at all. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Leeming.
Thank you, Chair. So of the things that you've spoken about in terms of the DevCo, interventions with transport infrastructure seems like something that you have some strength to work on, and it's welcome. But I wanted to ask you a question. Given the complicated layer of governance that we have around transport in the Greater Cambridge area and Cambridge as a whole, what do you see are the critical transport routes to address? Are you thinking that your work will be focusing on transport to and from Cambridge, in and out, transport within the city, transport within the radius of the city, so outer villages, and including this, given that your remit is growth, transport out of the Greater Cambridge, in and out of the Greater Cambridge area? So, I mean, I'm Camborne local member, I'm thinking about East-West Rail, but wider infrastructure to the city, be it railway or some other sort of infrastructure. What is your primary focus with your transport strategy?
So all of those things need to be taken into account as part of it. Transport isn't something that can be looked at in isolation, and it needs to connect into a network. So that is something that we've asked the consultants who are supporting us to help work on. And as Nathan said, we've recently appointed a technical director as well, who's going to be helping to shape this. So we are in the early stages. We haven't got all of those answers to it, but we are getting. We're in receipt of a lot of information, particularly we've been talking to a lot of the key employment sites and asking them for their transport, their travel to work data that they have. So we met with the Trinity Science Park last week. We've had similar conversations with other campuses around Cambridge. So we need to gather this data, but also use a lot of the data that's already available and has been developed as part of the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy, and compile all of that, and then look at how does that fit alongside potential scenarios when we develop them for the economic growth, and what the potential population could be so it's about the strategic and comprehensive approach to transport embedded within the economic planning and the wider spatial growth planning that will come in due course. So it's going to be it's not, I don't think it will be this is an entire network for a 30-40 year straight away. It's going to be looking at what are those first steps we need to implement. Obviously we've mentioned East-West Rail and trying to secure the support for the Cambridge East station, and bringing it all into a network approach. But I agree all of those points need to be looked at, and we are asking those questions of our team.
Councillor Lehman.
Thank you. So there are a number of I'm wondering how far your remit goes outside the Greater Cambridge area, because we are a destination and there is much transport in and out beyond South Cambridgeshire. That could be East Cambridgeshire, as has been said before, out into Suffolk, and I'm imagining once East West Rail comes into being, it will be halfway across the country. So I'm wondering how much of your focus is on bringing the sort of second ring of Cambridge transport into a more coherent transport policy, because there are areas that were outside the GCP's remit historically that have not been involved in transport discussions, but probably should have been.
So we're engaging with DFT in order to try to make those connections, because we need to work with the partners who are responsible for some of those areas, and obviously with the East West Rail team as well. I think I'd also just welcome if you've got, it sounds like there are areas that you think should have been included, and if you want to share anything with us separately, please do so, because we'd like to take that on board and ask the right questions so that we can ensure we're connecting into the, or collaborating with the right partners so that those considerations are made.
Thank you. So I'm thinking of towns like Mildenhall, and I'm thinking of villages around Cambridge, which are, some of them are geographically closer than those that are classified as South Cambridgeshire. So it's villages like Burwell, Bottisham. You have a sort of strange division where there's a village 3 miles away that would be included. 3 miles to the east, the one that's to the northeast, 3 miles, isn't included in this discussion because it's not South Cambridgeshire. It would come under East Cambridgeshire. It's a strange geographical boundary.
Thank you for that. I think we'll take a 5-minute break. So if we come offline for 5 minutes and then we will reconvene. Thanks very much. Thank you for that. So I think what I propose to do is bring the meeting to a close at 8:30. So if we take the remainder of the subjects in the next sort of 45 minutes, and so feel free to ask questions on all those things, but I think it's fair and reasonable to bring the meeting to a close at that point. So just familiarise yourself with the bits that we haven't covered thus far, and I know we have covered many of these things in the previous part of the meeting, but just have a look at those and put a request in to ask questions. Yeah, Councillor Bradman.
Sorry, I was asking whether you have taken the meeting live again.
We have, yeah.
Okay. No, if you'd like
Yes,
to.
please do.
Right, okay. I'm going to move to water sufficiency, foul water capacity and related issues. This is a serious block, as you know, at the moment on planning in the Greater Cambridge area. We've had Anglian Water initially, when we were talking about the development at Hartree, saying they didn't need to move and they had sufficient capacity. And then when Hartree has not been funded, they've now tried to put a block on some development, which is counterintuitive. So what do you think you can bring to this to make sure we have sufficient capacity for fresh water and sufficient capacity for removal of foul water?
I mean, the importance that we put on it is demonstrated by having Dr. Paul Lanster on the advisory council and by having sort of convened more water groups. Grappling with Anglian Water is harder than I'd hoped or expected. I've had meetings with their chief executive. I think that we have to kind of go back to Westminster, DEFRA, and really apply the pressure and make everybody involved understand how much of a blocker it is. I think to some extent that may require innovative ways of looking at how water companies raise money and charge for things. They, under sort of current systems, in effect, cannot finance, will not finance something that is for a population need that isn't definitely already there. And you therefore get into a kind of an empty space where government at one level is planning for a level of growth that isn't covered in an existing local plan, and the water company goes, don't know what to do. So we're grappling with that. I'd like to make a sort of general apology. We faced a lot of transport questions tonight, which we don't know the answers to. And you know, as I said earlier, we have only been growing our staff significantly, really, in the last kind of 9 to 12 months. We have, I think, a very good transport expert joining the staff very shortly, as well as the super high strategic one joining the advisory council. And so there's a lot of questions you've asked tonight, which we're really not dodging, but we probably need another 6 or 9 months, and we better come back for another late evening and answer them then. Anything else you want to add to water? Nathan?
Thank you. The growth company doesn't have any statutory responsibilities associated with water. But having said that, we're all aligned that water needs to be dealt with, and we're kind of well positioned as an interlocutor, I suppose, to not only continue to support the case for Greater Cambridge and water scarcity, but also to support the conversations that we know are happening between the Secretary of State and Anglian Water at the highest level. So we are providing information, supporting the representations that you made, and working with partners such as Dr. Paul Leinster, working with WRE as well, to be able to find different solutions to some of those challenges. Now, in some ways, we talked about, we know about the consultation for the Friends Reservoir that's recently closed. But in other ways, we are funding investigations in supporting WRE to look at things like nature-based solutions to promote aquifer recharge. And I think what's clear is there isn't going to be a silver bullet to resolve the water challenges. And I think it's also fair to say that probably a lot of the opportunities to address the water scarcity issues are going to be outside of Greater Cambridge as well. So there's a broad conversation that needs to happen. And I think certainly our role and our proximity to the face of government puts us in a position to be able to amplify and echo the position on that so that we can get some action.
Councillor Bratton.
Thank you. And in particular, my ward is Milton and Waterbeach, which is just the other side of the A14 from what was going to be Hartree, but is currently the Anglian Water Treatment Plant. And I just wondered, what is your view of the fact that that has, the money to move that has been withdrawn briefly, and or permanently for all we know. What's your view of that?
So my view is, I mean, from a environmental perspective, it's particularly in helping bring forward some of the projects that have been in the local plan. I think it's unfortunate in that way, but at the same time, the escalation in costs kind of made it unsustainable. So I think we come back to engaging with yourselves and with Stephen and having that continued dialogue around how we can then support to be able to deliver local ambitions in that area. And I think certainly what I'm happy to do is to come out and meet you so I can understand the challenges and get the strength of feeling that you're showing.
Very much welcome that. Thank you. I'll take you up on that.
Lovely, thanks very much. So we'll move on. We're online. We've got Councillor Rickson, I think.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, very well.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I've got a question around affordable housing. So it is, I guess, yeah, so the Cambridge Growth Company talked about delivering growth funded in part, I believe, by the capital increase created by the development of land, or linked to that. You know, we are us being in a housing crisis, with house prices ever increasing as a proportion of average wages. You know, housing development and delivery relies on the return of profits. You know, this leads to housing being brought to market at a rate that maintains house prices and not causes price reduction due to market saturation, and hence or making them more affordable. So it would appear that rapid delivery of homes for our growing society is at odds with the traditional model of house building. So how will the Cambridge Growth Company deliver the anticipated growth at a reasonable rate, uncoupled from traditional market, and ensure the provision of affordable homes?
Peter Freeman.
To some extent, the problem with housing delivery rates is the house builders are set up, ideally from their point of view, just to do sort of starter homes and executive homes. And they are set up to maximise price by building out at a certain rate. I think one of the things a development corporation can do, partly by actually going in and buying some of the land ahead, partly by maybe smarter negotiations than have been done by Homes England, amongst others, on commitments to build out, is to bring in a greater diversity of tenures and sizes and types. You know, not enough is built for old people. Not enough is built for shared build to rent. And so also too much is driven by the land price. If I have a kind of personal being like Bonnet, the whole industry is driven by acquiring a site by offering more than anybody else does for the site. It's not driven by offering the best scheme for a site. When Copenhagen started turning itself around about 25 years ago, the city adopted a rather extraordinary and wonderful policy. They said, we're basically going to buy in the land, and then we're going to put a price on the land for the site. You know, we'll say that's a £10 million site. Don't bid us 11 million. It's a £10 million site. Tell us what you can put on that site that will make the best contribution to the city. And if it worked in Copenhagen, why shouldn't it work here? And I think on top of that, the Development Corporation should work, use our expertise, use our connections in London, internationally, to bring in more low-cost finance. I was being asked about that by Councillor Stobart before. You know, institutions are, there's lots of global institutions, the sovereign wealth funds or whatever that the Treasury would love to talk about, who do have a lot of money, who cost of money is relatively low if it's made easy for them. Easy for them means there's not a planning problem, there's not an infrastructure problem, there's not a problem of lot size or management. So I think in parallel to everything else that we are doing as Development Corporation, we should be setting up, and we're talking to the Treasury about it, institutional co-investment funds that are, in a sense, in place as a takeout, and a relatively low-cost takeout because they're not being asked to take planning risk or infrastructure risk. And the lower the cost of the money, the easier it is to put affordable housing into it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Rickson.
No, that was really helpful. I've got nothing to follow up on that, so thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Peter, you picked up that point, but I just wanted to elaborate a little bit. So if you were thinking about the Waterbeach site, and of course, some of the parcels to the north of the site haven't yet reached a reserved matters stage. So there's some flexibility, and also over to the west also. But if you were to think of a kind of a strategy whereby, of course, the infrastructure on the on the western side is quite well developed, and the bridge over the A10 is about to open. We talked about the railway station and the busway. But as those things come in, and you're making a proposition to the residents that, yeah, it's easy to get into Cambridge, easy to get to the science park, not by using your car, but by using all these means. Could there be inserted into that process, alluding to what's just been said, a kind of support, or I was talking about a forward funding model, whereby you delivered a whole set of build-to-rent properties that would then, in a sense, marry with that infrastructure improvement. So is there a kind of step-by-step through some of the existing schemes whereby timely interventions, such as you've been talking about, would actually work very well and go through those, if you will, Section 106 thresholds that would, in a sense, oblige the developer to deliver? So is there feasibility in that?
So in a way, nothing succeeds more than success, and the quicker the take-up, the quicker you have the place, the more take-up you have, because it's an attractive place to go to. So, you know, looking at mix of uses or Section 106 or early infrastructure, they should all critically accumulate to making the place happen sooner. And if there's a sill rate, or if there's a Section 106 tariff at certain points, all of that should come in quicker by having a model that says we should be pushing on every button rather than just executive homes and starter homes.
Councillor Stobart.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything further. I mean, there's obviously potential there, but you know, the kind of things that we're seeing, perhaps across North Cambridge, is this interest in the 2 and 3 bedroom homes as opposed to the 4 bedroom homes, which have been the legacy of past developments. And also, yeah, that division is very clear at Waterbeach. All the smaller affordable homes are not, they're sold just like that, and the bigger market homes are not. Yeah, I think that's the basis for doing something. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stolar. We will. Do you want to come back on that at all? No. No. Thank you. We'll come on to Brian Mills next.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you, and good evening to Peter and the team. I've just got a question about absorption rates and how we can escalate when we've already got 37,000 homes with applications permitted, granted, but not built out, and we've got Homes England are responsible for some of that shortfall in build at Northstowe. We've got 2 development sites at Waterbeach with only a small number. So, if we've got even more houses that are going to be built, but we can't get the developers to build them out, what role has the Cambridge Growth Company got, and ADIFCO, have they got in respect to that? Thank you.
So I think that Peter has referenced, obviously, the tenure diversification, which is an important part of that strategy, and it's something that we are really keen to explore. So any further planned activity really does look at the demographics of the area and look at the potential opportunities that provides. And I think the Greater Cambridge area does provide a lot of opportunity there. Not only is there a need for sort of later living housing, but also the opportunity for co-living, build to rent, and others. So that is something that I think actually nationally has been looked at. Probably Cambridge and the Greater Cambridge area provides a greater range of that demographic mix, and therefore is a really good opportunity to look at that. I know that there's a lot of work on Northstowe that Homes England are doing to start to, as Peter said, bring in the town centre element and try to create the sense of place and make sure that is helping to generate the increase in the absorption rates. And what we're keen to do as well is look at each individual site and understand they'll all have their own separate issues. It's probably not going to be a one-size-fits-all. So whilst there are some strategies around diversification, there's also a need to actually go in and talk to each of them. I know when we spoke to Urban and Civic, which was actually out at Alconbury, they said one of their tactics was actually switching and trialling more build to rent, and that's really worked well for them. It's also worked well to have multiple outlets which are spread across a large scheme, and I think that's another thing that we're keen to encourage. It's looking and helping and working with them to say what is it that might help here and how can we help and facilitate with that, but also going forward being able to leverage the sort of institutional investment approach that Peter was referencing. That will also have a catalytic effect on the ability to have those absorption rates increase as well.
Well, yeah. Councillor Mills. We can't hear you, Councillor Mills.
Sorry, I'm just slightly dubious when we've got a government policy that's talking about 1.5 million homes before the end of their term in office, if they last that long. And I just wonder that it's 1.5 million homes. It sounds fine when it's on paper, but the blockage doesn't seem to be in the system to approve them. It seems to be the developers failing to take advantage of the permissions that have already been granted.
I think there's some nodding in the room, so I think that's been noted. Thank you for that,
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stephen Drew.
Thank you. Probably under a number of headings, I want to come back to the issue of probably community engagement and geographical drawing of your red lines. again, I'll start by saying something which, again, is a presumption of my question. It seems to me that what you're talking about in terms of DevCo is very heavily driven, obviously, by the government's wish for significant economic development, Cambridge being the powerhouse for that, and all those things from there. And no doubt, within documents you'll write and consultations you'll talk about the economic area around Cambridge, you'll talk about the travel to work area, you'll talk about lots of those things. Yet, you said earlier that you have decided to draw the red line for the DevCo around Cambridge City and South Cambs. Yet that means that places like Gamlingay and Papworth, which are right over in the west of South Cambs, are within the DevCo, but places like Bottisham and Burwell and Soham, which are actually closer to Cambridge and more tightly linked to Cambridge, are not. Yet the residents of those villages are actually more tightly linked to Cambridge than the residents of some of the places further to the west of Cambridge. So on the one hand, you've said that it's about, we would say it's about economics and all the rest of it, yet the decision to draw the red line doesn't seem to have been taken related to the economic reality of Cambridge. It seems to have been taken based on the fact that at some point 60 years ago or whatever, when local government reorganisation was done, the decision was made to draw the boundary of South Cambridgeshire where it currently is. Yet we've moved on and Cambridge has changed. I've lived in Cambridge all my life and Cambridge has changed completely in my life. I don't see how what you're arguing for the red line for the development company actually is realistic. And it puts people who live to the east of Cambridge out of it who should be in it. And people who live far to the west of Cambridge in it who probably don't need to be in it.
I think we're in the art of the possible and practical, and just as in LGR, the kind of shuffling of the pack is within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and there's not, although I think Huntingdon has wondered whether it ought to have Tempersford. You're absolutely right. If you had a completely blank sheet of paper, what you're saying makes sense. But I think there isn't a blank sheet of paper, and for a development corporation to start straddling different counties, democratic deficit becomes even harder. How many different councils have to be represented on it, and so on. So I completely see the logic of what you're saying, but we're all sort of playing the ball from where it lies rather than starting from scratch.
Government can do whatever it chooses to do, and if it wished to draw the boundary where it wished to draw it, it would draw it. And if it wished to draw the local government boundary where it wished to draw it, it would draw it. What I would take what you're saying is that the DevCo has one hand tied behind its back from its start because it cannot include everything that economically would rationally be within it. That is my perspective.
Can I just add that obviously the decision hasn't been finalised on the Development Corporation. There's a consultation, and I would really welcome everybody to put their views into that because then they can be taken on board through that proper process. So I'd recommend that.
My second question I'm going to try and ask really briefly, which will be that was going to sound really awful. I was going to say, I assume you understand. I really didn't mean to suggest that you didn't. I was trying to be really short. One of the issues you've talked about is to do with infrastructure and services and such like, as much as possible front-loaded and things. I'm one of the other district councillors of Camborne. Residents in Camborne are generally incredibly supportive of new housing. As councillors, we are seeing virtually no opposition whatsoever from Camborne residents to the building of North Camborne. So North Camborne will double the size of Camborne, possibly and more. And basically, the residents of Camborne are, I'm going to say, comfortable with it. That's about as far as I would go. They're comfortable with East West Rail. They're very supportive of C2C. So residents in Camborne who have maximum lived here for 25 years are generally very, very positive. They are very open-minded. They will say, well, we've come to a new town. Why wouldn't we have more new houses built? So they're very, very positive. But they are profoundly concerned, and I would say angry is a reasonable word, about the fact that the high street has never been built in Camborne, 25 years after it was built, and a decision has just been made related to the building of shops within West Camborne, which actually at the moment is going to reduce the pace with which some of the retail units are coming in West Camborne. They may come eventually, but there seems to be that. The view of many Camborne residents is that the developers seem to be able to promise things, agree things, and then never build them. And that the privilege that the developers have to be able to make all the profits that they make by building the houses in this golden goose area, they don't live up to their promises. Is that going to change? Are the developers going to have their feet held to the fire and actually be made to deliver the things that they promise to deliver when they get their planning permissions? Camborne has now 14,000 people. It has no high street. It's a collective fault of everyone involved. It is our fault as the council. It is the town council's fault. It is the developer's fault. We are collectively to blame for the fact there's no high street in Camborne. The development shops in West Camborne is starting to look problematic. Are the developers going to be having their feet held to the fire by you and actually made to do a better job? Because at the moment, they're not doing a good enough job, and they're being given the privilege of building here tens of millions of pounds of profit, and they're not doing their job.
I mean, I don't think we have power to hold people's feet to the fire on schemes which we didn't have a hand in. It partly goes to what I said earlier about the site goes to the person who paid the highest price. They want to build executive homes and whatever, and retail or placemaking is not what house builders have typically done. I do think that we have a role at looking at much more holistic development and ensuring that if there's not real confidence that the developer will do it on their side, then the development corporation should, in a sense, stay in and deliver the infrastructure themselves. And I think Urban and Civic, do a very good job compared with 90% of the house building market, that they are prepared to put infrastructure up front, because their job is not to make the house builder's profit. That's for the house builder. Their job is to create a place in which housing will get taken up quicker. And I think the development corporation is all about creating the place that makes people want to come and stay.
Okay, I will finish before handing over to the remaining speakers. If you remember, I said a few minutes ago that obviously people in Camborne are very, very supportive of new housing and they're very up for it. Despite that, the single biggest thing that people in Camborne talk about all the time is they feel failed by the planning system. And they feel failed by the planning system because they live in a new town and they feel as if the developers are allowed to just build house after house after house after house after house. Contracts are signed that say they have to build these things, and government, because it's beyond planning authority, government fails to make the house builders do their job. And that is the view of residents in a new town. So I would definitely appeal to you to absolutely bear in mind that if you wish local residents to see you as people who are working in their interests, that is absolutely fundamental for residents in the new towns. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Councillor Drew. I've got 4 more speakers and I don't propose to take any more. So we will come on to Councillor Martin Khan and then Councillor Anna Bradnam, Councillor Stobart and then Councillor Lehman. And I'll squeeze in Councillor Fain if we have time at the end. Lovely.
Okay, coming back to the issue of affordable housing again, because that's one of the really big issues here, and the supply of housing. I'm not surprised that the delivery from private house builders, in fact, the delivery from private house builders historically has been fairly constant all along. The problem has been the supply of affordable housing. It used to be provided by public bodies, such as councils, for instance, and if you look at it's interesting to look at the early new towns in this sense, because they were development corporations, and they supplied housing themselves. A large proportion of the housing was provided by the new towns on land, which at that time, in the early days, in any case, they could buy existing use value. So there was a profit there to be made, and it made it much more viable. The situation you've got now is we don't have the public, anything like the amount of public sector investment in housing, and so that it's about, I think, a fifth or a sixth now of what it was then. You don't have you have to buy at the maximum profit value, and so that's very difficult to build affordable housing. And you have a situation whereby if it's a public body selling land, so if it buys to sell off, it has to sell at the maximum profit for the profit. It has a degree of public obligation to sell at the maximum profit. It's not necessarily then the best plan like you described in Copenhagen. So I see some legal problems about this.
Draw to a close if you can, yeah.
Yeah, so I just wondered how you see tackling these problems. I mean, I think it's these are intrinsic problems. Can you get around them as a development corporation in a way that we don't know about, and which perhaps a local authority or other public would not be able to?
I actually think there's more flexibility in the system to have other considerations other than the highest price, but they aren't used enough. Beth can probably speak more in terms of Homes England disposal policies and flexibilities in them.
Just briefly, Beth, and then we'll move on if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. We take more into account than the price. So we look at the quality and we look at what's being delivered as Homes England, and we provide it through a building lease, so that actually there are some controls through that procurement process as to how things are being built out. And I think that is a model that would be a base model for us that we'd be looking to build upon. So absolutely.
And you foresee building directly affordable housing or other housing like in the previous sector, like the previous development corporation?
I don't know whether it's necessary. I think what we need to make sure is that we are using taxpayers' money to the best effect, and where we can leverage, but we can deliver good quality, and we can leverage private sector, we should be doing that. But you know, all options are being considered.
Lovely. Councillor Anna Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your patience so far with all our questions. I wanted to ask about community engagement. You mentioned this very briefly early on. We are absolutely committed in this Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service to engaging properly with the communities who are going to be affected by our planning developments and hearing their views through the planning process. How do you envisage that happening for the Cambridge Growth Company, and do you have that same commitment to public engagement?
I think, yes, we do have the same commitment to public engagement. I don't know whether, Karen, you want to add any more?
Lovely. Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
We'll hold you to that.
Lovely. Councillor Stobart.
Chair, thank you. So this concerns environmental initiatives, and you've talked about corridors. I think when you were starting up, but it kind of provoked this idea of if we are doing things on a big scale. Now this is beyond even our kind of big developments. What can be done differently if you have a very big geographical area, numbers of people, that couldn't be done at a smaller scale? And does working at bigger scales open up new technologies and new techniques that couldn't be done on a development level? So what's the potential for doing things on a big scale?
Potential for doing things on a big scale.
Huge.
Yes, on environmental.
It's huge. I think really when you look and from the work in the Oxcam area, it's more towards kind of like Bicester. We're working with a farming cluster covering 300 square kilometres to look at how agricultural land that's not productive can be managed to the benefit of nature. I think looking forward and looking at what's come forward in the emerging local plan and also what's coming forward in the local nature recovery strategy, I think there's some massive opportunities to see how we can get involved in being able to bring that forward. And also, really, there's really exciting potential in terms of landscape scale, kind of like connected habitats, where you can get agglomeration of benefits, particularly around utilising things like biodiversity net gain, steering that towards local nature recovery strategies, and then starting to build something that has a lot greater scale, but is equally not just good for the environment, but good for well-being and for community access as well. So I think the potential is really big.
Thank you for that. Lovely. Did you have a follow-up very briefly so I can bring the other two speakers in?
Question to you, about
Yes.
How we wrap this up and whether we're going to invite the CGC team back again for another review.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable point. And I think Peter Freeman alluded to that earlier in that, you know, it might be that when, you know, we're 9 months down the line, that these things come back to us when there's a little bit more clarity on some of those big questions that residents have. We'll move on. So, Councillor Helen Lehman.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions. They're quite different. So the first question is to do with funding. Cambridgeshire at the moment is already experiencing quite significant growth, and Whitehall doesn't seem to have noticed. So at the moment I sit on the Police and Crime Commissioner panel, and our funding from national government is given based on a population. They're insisting on using the population from the census in 2011, and our population has grown by over 100,000 since then. Could I ask, please, that if the Greater Cambridgeshire area does continue to grow, that it is communicated across Whitehall so that funding for things such as police, fire, education is based on the population that we do have, not what we had in the past, please. I'm actually asking you for a favour because I think you may be in a different circuit to me. But please, could you raise that? Thank you. That's my first question. My second question is to do with funding. So you spoke a lot about private investment. How can we be sure that there won't be conflicts of interest with landowners in the area to do with public private funding coming into the area? And could I please ask that we won't have any PFIs?
Peter Freeman.
First point. What?
It was the microphone.
On the first point, we are very happy to kind of feed back the inequity, which is particularly unfair to an area that's taken so much more growth than most people. And if you give us the facts, we're fire the bullets. On the conflict of interest, I'm not sure what you mean. Is it different to anywhere else in the country, or is it the same problem of a landowner just wanting the highest price? And
just your microphone.
The university is a major landowner in our area. So how will we ensure that there isn't a conflict of interest with people sitting on a board advocating for investment on their land?
I think in allocating land, the primary reason for allocating it is it's probably in the right place relative to transport, or relative to not being a floodplain, or not being an area of special scientific interest or whatever. I think there is, to an extent, a secondary reason for allocating it. If the landowner really wants to play ball and make the land available at a very cost-effective level to the state. So we are having a number of discussions with landowners, and you know, it's a sort of advantage that perhaps we are increasing the ultimate envelope, where we are saying, yeah, maybe your site will be allocated, maybe it won't, but what are you prepared to offer to the state on your land? And Stephen is probably looking terribly shocked because that's buying planning consents or whatever. But I think, you know, if somebody owns a big enough piece of land and you can do a comprehensive development that includes schools and every form of housing, and they are being realistic, practical about what they will put on it or the price at which they will sell it to the state. In my view, that does become a consideration because it enables you to provide more public benefit.
Thank you.
It's not the overriding consideration. It has to be a sensible place to develop in its own right. But if you had two sites either side of a road and in planning terms they were each as good, then I think we should be trying to drive a hard bargain with one of the landowners.
Councillor Lehman, did you want to follow up on that?
It's an interesting answer. I would hope that any such decisions were made with complete transparency in public about what has been done and why. I think as it's getting late, I'm going to move on to my last question, which is a bit more jolly. I understand that part of your aim is to make Cambridge and the Greater Cambridge area really appealing at a global level. Because if we're going to draw in investment and high-skilled people from all over the world, we're competing against the best cities in the world. So there's a lot of good things that we have in our area, but there are quite a few things that we're missing. I'm wondering whether you are thinking of any recreational facilities, concert halls, leisure facilities that we don't have at the moment that perhaps we would need to sort of move in a sort of punch above our current weight at the moment as an appeal to draw people to want to live here. Not just that it's practical to live here and that we've got a decent road, but actually they might be able to go and see their favourite band on a Saturday night.
So I had a meeting, I think about 2 weeks ago, with the bursar of King's College, who I think is sort of funding a group of people involved in theatre and art and whatever to look at an art strategy. And I'm coming back shortly to meet them again with Peter Bazalgette, who was chair of the Arts Council, who's an old friend. And you know, we clearly would like to help the art and culture of the town. Sooner or later, maybe there can be a new football ground. And you know, as we look at major development sites, I certainly have it in the back of my mind, you know, might that be a place the football ground could go, and does that become part of the mix of uses and so on? So yes, all of those things which make life rich and varied are not kind of fringe benefits. They're things that must come with to keep the engine of quality of life and interest roaring.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you. I'm just going to point out that I am a ward member for Camborne, who will have a railway station on the East West Rail and is a strategic development site. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that. Councillor Fane.
Thank you, Chair. Since you kindly said you would squeeze me in as the last question, I shall try to resist the temptation to cover all of the remaining 6 issues that we have to cover tonight. But there is, of course, a common theme here. In drawing up a local plan, we are facing an infrastructure deficit and a difficulty in seeing how we would fund that. If you're then talking about developing a lot more houses, I won't go into numbers, and other facilities too, then you face a bigger infrastructure deficit and a bigger challenge in funding it. Councillor Bradnam sought to tempt you to say you were committed to the existing plans for transport, and you said existing plus, and if there was an opportunity to fund extra, you would go for it. And then on affordable housing, you said, and I think you know we would all accept this, that too much is determined by land price, and you talked about the Copenhagen example. Now, another point that you made that I would pick up is you said that one of the advantages of a development corporation is you can have statutory powers and choose not to use them. I'm wondering whether you're expecting the development corporation to have powers of compulsory purchase and whether that might enable you to release additional funds by land value capture, whether that is something which you're looking at or whether you would be reluctant to go down that route.
I think we we would certainly seek to have the powers. I think everybody who is a compulsory purchase practitioner says that the powers should be used as a threat rather than a reality, because it's slow and painful. But I think it's, if we're going to make infrastructure happen, leaving aside putting ordinary development sites together, you need a corridor for infrastructure, and you absolutely have to have CPO in the envoy.
Thank you for that. We just have one more speaker. Is that Councillor Richard Williams? Are you indicating to speak? If so, very briefly, because we're going to try and bring the meeting to a close.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. I had to switch venue from the chamber. I just had a question about water, if that's okay, and just a quick one about what the situation is with water credits, because we mentioned right at the start that the work of the company had unlocked houses, but that was because we were told on planning we had to give material weight to the ministerial statement about water credits. But then I noticed there was no mention of water credits in the presentation at the start. So I was wondering what the situation is there. Apologies if somebody's already asked this and I missed it while I was in the car travelling.
It hasn't been asked. So, water credits, will you be taking those into account?
They're still very live. They're still being discussed and taken forward within colleagues in MHCLG to determine how that scheme might work. So just because I didn't mention them, it doesn't mean they're not there, but they are, and I'll happily pick up with you, Councillor, afterwards if you wanted another time to go into that in a bit more detail.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Thank you for that. So I will draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all for coming to answer questions. Thank you, councillors, for asking those questions. I'm sorry it's been a little bit of a longer meeting, but I think that demonstrates some of the interest and some of the lacking knowledge and understanding around this subject. And I think probably the onus is going to be on yourselves to get that communication across to councillors, residents, parish councillors, so they have a better understanding of what is going on, I think. Thanks very much for your time. So the date of the next meeting, yes, when is the date?
The 18th of February, and that's the extraordinary meeting.
Oh yeah, 18th of February, 5:30.